The cold descended from the mountain peaks, as it was its custom in the heart of late October, a presence both cruel and inevitable, a chill that sought out every fissure in a person's soul and made a home there for the winter. Margaret Hayes stood upon the porch of her small cabin, her hands a cradle for a coffee mug long since surrendered to the cold, her gaze fixed upon the fog as it wove through the pines with a somber, deliberate grace. After 63 years of life, she had come to read the skies the way others might read a lover's face, and this approaching storm, it was coming with a snarl. For nearly 6 years, she had made her sanctuary here in the Appalachian backcountry, ever since the day Thomas was taken from her. A heart that simply stopped in the dead of winter, long before any ambulance could conquer the treacherous ice of Route 19. The doctors had called it quick, offering the word as if it were a kindness, a balm for the wound, as if speed could somehow lessen the ache of absence. It could not. But the silence here, it offered a different kind of solace. This silence was a tangible thing, heavy and textured. It poured itself into the empty spaces his voice once occupied, making the cabin feel at once like a cavern and a cage. For 37 years, Margaret had been a nurse, a guardian in the chaos of Mercy General's emergency room, back in a time when you fought to mend lives rather than merely chronicling their end. She had borne witness to it all, the ruin of metal and flesh from roadside collisions, the quiet surrenders to poison, the sudden voids left by violence. She had pieced together human beings like shattered mosaics, always knowing some fragments were lost forever. She believed she had seen the full spectrum of human fragility. Believed. In the past tense, for the thing that transpired on that night, the entity that clawed its way out of the tempest and into the small circle of her world, it would shatter the very architecture of her reality. But I am moving too far ahead in the telling. Allow me to draw back the curtain and show you the path that led a retired nurse to a precipice, to a choice that brought her face to face with a creature born of impossible whispers. Because this story will unravel everything you believe to be true about the ancient life that slumbers in these mountains. Now, before we venture further into the heart of Margaret's Chronicle, I ask you to join our circle of witnesses, become a subscriber to this channel. We are dedicated to the stories that dwell in the shadows of the known world, the tales that ask you to question everything. And believe me, once you have heard what Margaret found in the storm, you will want to remain with us for what comes next. Very well, let us now step into the heart of the storm. Her cabin was a final whisper at the end of a fire road the world had forgotten since the Reagan administration. It stood 7 miles from the nearest soul and 12 from the nearest town. The man who sold it to her had labeled it secluded. Margaret had called it salvation. She had purchased it with the money from Thomas's life insurance, a final gift, and moved her life into its quiet embrace that April, spending her first summer relearning the art of being alone without becoming lost. The little house wore its years, much as she did, with weathered boards and creaking joints, held together more by a quiet defiance than by structural might. A single bedroom, a kitchen that flowed into a living space anchored by a great stone fireplace, and plumbing that moaned its protests but always delivered. There was no signal for a cell phone, only satellite internet that obeyed its own whims, and a landline that hummed with the ghosts of static on the clearest of days. She slowly, tenderly made it her own. An herb garden bloomed out back with basil, rosemary, and chamomile herbs as tenacious as the mountain soil itself. Bird feeders became invitations to chickadees and nuthatches, tiny sparks of life. A woodpile grew, stacked with logs she had split that first autumn, her shoulders burning with each swing of the maul as she proved to herself some silent, nameless truth about her own endurance. Her days fell into a gentle, repeating rhythm. She would rise before the sun, sipping coffee on the porch as dawn set the fog ablaze. Her breakfast was a simple affair, oatmeal sweetened with honey from the town's general store. Her hours were then filled with the small, sacred tasks of a life untethered from deadlines, tending to her garden, splitting more wood for the fire, losing herself in paperback novels from the library sale. She walked the forest trails, memorizing the contours of the land until they felt like her own. The forest possessed a silence all its own, a quietude entirely different from that of an empty house. This was a listening silence, a patient and ancient presence. It had been here long before the first road was carved, and it would remain long after the last one crumbled to dust, holding within it a wisdom that humankind had long since forgotten. At times, Margaret would feel its gaze upon her, a sense of being observed. It was not a menacing feeling, but one of deep, quiet attention, as if the very trees were sentient and marking her passage. She would hear the nocturnal sounds, the sharp crack of a branch under a heavy foot, the deliberate movement of something substantial through the undergrowth. Bears, she told herself, or perhaps elk. The wildlife officer who visited her first week had spoken of bears, of securing her trash and making her presence known on the trails. And she followed all the rules. She carried bear spray on her hip during her walks and ensured the trash was sealed in its metal, latched container. Yet, in the deepest part of her soul, in that place where intuition resides, Margaret knew that the presence that stalked these woods in the dark of night was not one you could find in any field guide. Thomas had always chuckled at her intuition, affectionately calling it her nurse sense. He'd swear she could smell a crisis long before the ambulance sirens began to wail, and he was not mistaken. Some souls, it seems, are simply tuned to a frequency that others cannot perceive. Margaret had always been one of those souls. October arrived with its breathtaking funeral procession of color, a final, glorious blaze of gold, crimson, and fire before the world surrendered to the coming gray. The season of tourists had passed. The last of the hikers had folded their tents and retreated from the encroaching cold, returning to their own worlds. Margaret was once more enveloped in a profound solitude, precisely as she wished to be. The storm gathered its power over the course of 3 days. It began as a mere smudge of bruised clouds on the horizon, then announced itself as a drop in pressure that ached in her bad knee, a painful memento from 1989, from a desperate chase after a patient who mistook a fourth-floor window for a doorway. By the third day, the wind had found its teeth, and the sky wore a sickly, yellow-gray pallor that spoke of true elemental fury. She began her preparations with the quiet efficiency of one who lives on the edge of the wild. The bathtub was filled with water against the pump failing. More wood was brought in to feed the fire. She charged the satellite phone and the small, battery-powered radio. A pot of vegetable beef soup was set to simmer, a fragrant anchor that could sustain her for a week. These were the simple, essential rites of mountain life. A Catechism of Survival 101. As dusk fell, the rain began. It was not a gentle, whispering rain, but a percussive assault that hammered against the cabin. The tin roof became a war drum, its rhythm a relentless, deafening beat. Lightning tore the sky in jagged, blinding strokes, and with each flash, the forest was transformed into a stark, monochrome photograph trees frozen in their violent dance, rain suspended in its sideways flight. Margaret sat by the hearth, a silent witness as the storm waged its war upon the mountain. From the radio, the lonesome voices of Patsy Cline and Hank Williams drifted, melodies from an era before music lost its heart. A book lay open in her lap, a thriller about some distant city's darkness, but her eyes saw no words. She was simply listening, feeling the old cabin groan and shift around her, its timbers creaking like the bones of a great ship lost on a tempestuous sea. It was then, around 9 o'clock in the evening, that a new sound pierced the storm symphony. A resonance that vibrated beneath the tempest's roar, a sound that was deep, weighted, and utterly wrong. It came from the darkness beyond the woodshed, perhaps 50 yards into the tree line, a sodden thud, as if a great weight had met the earth. And then, an unnerving silence, swallowed by the ceaseless howl of rain and wind and thunder. Margaret gently closed her book. Her heart began the frantic, familiar flutter it once knew in the emergency room, the body's old alarm to the crackle of an incoming trauma call. Adrenaline flooded her veins, her body arming itself for a reality her mind had not yet begun to comprehend. And then, a second sound tore through the night. Not the dead weight of a fall, but the living torment of a cry. It was a guttural, agonized sound that belonged to no world she knew. It was not human, yet it was not purely animal. It was a lament from the spaces in between, a sound that made the fine hairs on her neck rise and her instincts scream, to bolt the door, to feign deafness, to pretend she had heard nothing at all. But Margaret Hayes had not weathered 37 years in the crucible of emergency medicine by learning to ignore the sound of suffering. She rose and took her rain slicker from its hook. She found the heavy-duty flashlight, the kind with enough heft to serve as a cudgel. Her hand instinctively checked the canister of bear spray on her belt, though a deeper knowledge told her this was no trouble a bear could cause. Her boots were where they always were, by the door, and she pulled them on, her hands now trembling with a faint, electric tremor. And outside, the tempest lay in wait, as if it had summoned her to bear witness. The instant she stepped from the shelter of the porch, the rain struck her face like 1,000 icy needles. The wind fought to tear the slicker from her back, while her flashlight's beam was a fragile spear that barely pierced 10 feet into the deluge. Lightning cracked the heavens, so close she could feel its vibration in her bones, and in that blinding, ephemeral light, she saw it all. The clearing, the woodshed, and the unblinking darkness of the tree line that lay beyond. An unnerving stillness had fallen over the land, as if the world itself were holding its breath. She willed her body forward, each step a deliberate pilgrimage into the unknown, while the saturated earth sighed and clung to her boots. A cold, merciless rain streamed down her face, blurring her vision with its sorrow, as the solitary beam of her flashlight danced like a lost spirit, desperately seeking solace in the oppressive dark. The cry echoed once more through the night, a sound closer now, its mournful source undeniably woven into the shadowed form of the woodshed. As Margaret rounded the corner of the shed, her light held aloft like a fragile shield. The universe, as she understood it, fractured, for her beam fell upon the impossible. For a timeless moment, her mind refused to weave the vision into reality, a form too vast, a shape born of myth, draped in a dark fur matted with rain, earth, and, dear God, a tide of crimson that stained the very ground. It lay there, a fallen titan in the mire, one leg twisted into a geometry of agony that stole the breath from her lungs. Its height was a staggering 7, perhaps even 8 feet, with a breadth that eclipsed any mortal man, and arms sculpted with a power that could peel steel from a car door, and its face, oh, the heavens, that face. It was a tapestry of life's forgotten threads, neither ape nor man, but a third, silent kingdom. A creature spun from the whispers of campfire legends and the ghosts of grainy films, a myth made flesh to haunt the edges of the world. Then, within the halo of her light, its eyes found hers vast, dark pools of existence, shimmering not only with excruciating pain, but with a terrifying, profound understanding. It was a gaze that knew her, a silent plea cast across the impossible gulf between their worlds. Margaret stood as a statue in the storm, the rational part of her soul, screaming that this was a phantom, a dream. But the healer within her, that ancient, unwavering core that had borne witness to every shade of suffering, had already answered the call, her body moving forward on a tide of pure compassion. From the creature's throat rumbled a low, guttural note, a sound that held the timbre and inflection of a question. "Easy," she heard a voice, miraculously her own, a calm island in the tempest raging in her chest. "Easy now. Let me see what has been done to you." She drew closer, her steps a slow and reverent dance, lowering the beam of light as a gesture of peace. In this new, intimate space, the wound revealed its brutal truth, a deep, ragged canyon carved through muscle, from which a dark lifeblood, nearly black in the weeping sky, still flowed. The limb itself was a ruin, clearly broken above the knee. Its gaze followed her approach, yet it remained perfectly still, a monument of trust. It offered no threat, no aggression. It simply lay there in the mud and the rain, its labored breaths of fragile rhythm, waiting. As Margaret knelt, an aroma rose to meet her, not just of wet fur, but of something far older. It was the scent of deep earth, of ancient moss and primal time, as if the very soul of the forest had been given form and breath. In all her years, no scent had ever spoken to her like this, a forgotten language her ancestors might have known, a fragrance of both reverence and fear. "I am going to help you," she whispered. The words perhaps lost to the wind, but the tone a universal melody she knew would be understood. "But I must fetch my supplies. My kit. Do you understand me?" As she rose, its gaze remained upon her, a steadfast anchor in the swirling chaos. Those eyes. A universe of brown, deep and fathomless, holding an impossible, heartbreaking awareness. She ran back toward the sanctuary of the cabin, her thoughts a maelstrom of beautiful, terrifying unreality. She could feel the tendrils of shock beginning to bloom at the edges of her consciousness, but decades of service had taught her to usher that feeling into a distant room of her soul and lock the door, for the moment at hand required all of her. Her medical kit, her arsenal of healing, rested in the bathroom closet. It was no simple box of bandages, but a true medical cache she had quietly assembled, a forbidden dowry from her former life containing intravenous bags, sutures, antibiotics, potent balms against pain, and dressings in vast, comforting quantities. She gathered it all in a flurry of purpose, adding a bottle of cleansing alcohol and a jar of her own herbal salve, a creation of comfrey and calendula, a secret whispered from the earth itself. A clean sheet, destined to be torn into ribbons of aid, joined the collection in a canvas bag, and then she plunged once more into the heart of the storm. The great being remained as she had left it, a stoic mountain of suffering, as the relentless rain washed over its immense form, unable to cleanse the slow, persistent weeping of its life force. Margaret placed her bag upon the sodden earth and retrieved the alcohol. "This will bring a fire of its own," she murmured, her voice a thread of pure sincerity. But the quiet poison that follows is a far greater enemy than pain. In that moment, it felt as if the ancient forest, the very trees themselves, had paused their eternal sighing to bear witness. She poured the clear liquid into the wound, and the creature's entire body went rigid, while a sound was torn from its soul, a terrible symphony of a roar and a cry. And yet, it did not pull away. It did not strike. It simply endured. Her hands became a blur of practiced grace, cleansing the wound against the curtain of rain. The slowing flow of blood was a small mercy, a sign that the deepest rivers of life remained untouched. The gash was profound, yet its edges were clean, as if sliced by something far more terrible than the claws of a bear. She packed the wound with her earthen salve, her hands guided by the ghosts of 1,000 emergency room shifts, an instinct that lived deeper than thought. Then came the bandages, layer upon loving layer, a tight embrace to hold the brokenness together. But the leg remained a challenge, a shattered bone she could not hope to set in this cathedral of mud. "We must find you shelter from this deluge," she spoke. The words, a prayer to herself as much as a plea to the creature. "Can you move at all?" Its profound eyes locked with hers once more, a flicker of resolve passing between them. With a colossal effort, it began to rise, pushing halfway toward the sky before its ruined leg betrayed it, sending it crashing back to the earth with a groan that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. "All right," Margaret breathed, her spirit undeterred, her mind already charting a new course through the impossible. "All right, we will find another way." Her gaze fell upon the woodshed. It was a humble sanctuary, nothing more than a roof and 3 walls, but it was closer than the cabin. If she could somehow bridge that impossible distance, it would be a haven, a small kingdom of dryness in a world drowning in rain. She drew near its massive form, wedging her shoulder beneath an arm as gnarled and dense as an ancient oak, a solid wall of sinew and bone. "Lend me your strength," she whispered. "We must do this together." And the being responded, its own immense power joining hers. They carved a path to the woodshed, a journey measured in inches that stretched into feet, a grueling 20 minutes to cross a mere 30 yards of earth. When they finally reached the shelter, a chorus of agony sang through Margaret's shoulders, and her spine felt pierced by 1,000 phantom nails. Yet, they had arrived. The great creature crumpled to the floor of the shed, its breath coming in ragged, deep sighs. Margaret remained framed in the doorway, the cold rain a curtain behind her, her gaze fixed upon the impossible act she had just willed into being. She had offered aid to a legend, a shadow from the deep woods, a living, breathing Bigfoot, a creature of myth made flesh. The sheer unreality of it all struck her with the force of a physical blow. A laugh escaped her, not of joy, but of a mind stretched to its breaking point, a wild, frayed sound. The creature turned its head, and in the fathomless depth of its eyes, she perceived a flicker of bewilderment. "Forgive me," she breathed, the words catching in her throat. "It's just, this is a moment outside of all reason. Surely you feel it too. The world has tilted on its axis." From the creature's chest rumbled a low, resonant sound, a note that seemed to hum with a quiet, profound accord. Propelled by a new sense of purpose, Margaret made one last pilgrimage to the cabin. She gathered thick wool blankets, fragrant with the scent of the cedar chest that was their home, a heavy tarp to shield them from the storm's relentless tears, fresh bandages, clean water, and the steady, quiet light of her battery-powered lantern. Returning to the sanctuary of the shed, she placed the lantern where it would cast a gentle, golden halo against the encroaching dark. She draped the tarp across the opening, a bulwark against the wind, and laid the blankets near the creature, an offering, not an imposition, for she could not know if her touch would be seen as a comfort or a threat. And through it all, the creature observed her every move, its gaze, a universe of ancient, impossible awareness. "This is all I have to give," Margaret confessed at last, her body sinking against a stack of firewood as the day's fire left her, leaving only tremors and a bone-deep weariness. "Your leg, it needs a healer's true hands. The gash calls for a needle and thread, but this salve is the best I can offer. You must grant yourself the gift of stillness. You must allow yourself to heal." The great being stirred, a subtle adjustment in search of some small measure of peace, a fleeting comfort in a body racked with a fractured bone and a deeply torn thigh. Margaret drew her rain slicker close, a fragile shield against the chill. The rain beat a percussive elegy upon the tin roof. Reason beckoned her back to the cabin, to warmth and sleep, to the familiar solitude of her bed, but some unseen tether, stronger than logic, held her fast in that place. Perhaps it was the ghost of the nurse she once was, a spirit that could never abandon the suffering. Perhaps it was the scholar's thirst for wonder, the impossible chance to witness a being torn from the pages of folklore. Or perhaps it was a reason far more elemental, the hollow echo of loneliness, the profound ache of 6 long years of silent conversations, of solitary meals, of sleeping in a bed that forever held the shape of an absence. I lost my husband. The words spilled from her, a river undammed, its source a mystery even to her. It has been 6 years. His heart simply stopped. We had bargained for more time, you see. We had promised each other 30 more years, a lifetime. But time, it is a merciless accountant. It does not heed our promises. And the creature, in its stillness, seemed to listen. Its breath, once a storm, had gentled into the rhythm of a quiet tide. I sought refuge in these mountains, hoping to escape. Her hand made a faint, sweeping gesture at the world beyond the trees, the chorus of it all. The crowds, the clamor, the million tiny echoes of his absence. But grief is a shadow that you cast yourself. It travels with you. It is endlessly patient. It simply waits. A low rumble of thunder traversed the mountain's spine, a final, distant sigh. The storm was passing. I cannot know the truth of what you are, Margaret went on, her voice soft as moss. Nor if these human words mean anything to you at all. But in this moment, in this night, I am so deeply grateful for your presence. Because for the first time in 6 long, empty years, the solitude does not feel absolute. And from the creature came a sound, a murmur, as soft and gentle as the forest floor after the rain. And so they kept their vigil through the turning of the night, a woman and a myth, sharing the silence as the storm spent its fury and the deep woods hushed itself around them. Sleep must have claimed her at some point, for she awoke to the pearly gray light of dawn seeping through the tarp's imperfections. A protest arose from her stiff neck, and her back sang a chorus of complaint from what felt like 7 different points of pain. A chill had settled deep within her bones, a cold born not of the morning air, but of being 63 years old and finding rest upon the hard-packed earth. With a low groan, she pushed herself upright, her joints crackling like dry leaves. And there it was, real as the morning chill, not some figment of a weary mind. It lay on its side, eyes closed, its breath a steady, even rhythm. The bandage on its leg bore the crimson blossoms of its wound, but it was not saturated. A hopeful sign. Margaret rose with deliberate care, finding her footing in the new day. The rain had ceased its lament, leaving the world glistening and renewed. Ribbons of mist clung to the trees like departing spirits, and from the quiet woods, a solitary crow cried out, its voice a stark and lonely note in the stillness. She yearned for the simple ritual of coffee, for the clarity of thought, for some map to navigate the impossible territory of what was to come. Just as she turned to depart the small haven of the shed, a sound reached her, a whisper at first, then growing in clarity. The sound of footfalls, not her own. There were more than one, moving through the forest's wet undergrowth with a heavy, measured purpose. A sudden ice flowed through Margaret's veins, rooting her to the spot. The approaching steps grew louder, the sharp snap of a twig, the wet crunch of fallen leaves under a great weight. These were heavy beings, and their number was more than one. Her gaze flew to the creature beside her. Its eyes were open, and within their dark pools, a new light had dawned. It was not fear that she saw, but a profound awareness, a look of ancient recognition. And then, just beyond the thin walls of the shed, the heavy footsteps fell silent. Her fingers found the cold comfort of the bear spray at her hip, a gesture born of habit, though a deeper instinct whispered of its utter futility. For whatever presence lingered in the gloaming, if its will was to enter, no earthly barrier would hold it back. A silhouette first painted the canvas of the tarp, a fleeting darkness that was swiftly joined by another, and then another still, a silent procession of gathering night. With a breath held captive in her chest, Margaret's hand moved with a deliberate slowness, drawing back the heavy fabric to gaze upon the world that waited beyond. And in that moment, the very air seemed to abandon her lungs. They were a silent forest unto themselves, their forms materializing at the clearing's edge, sentinels woven between the ancient trees, standing vigil near her humble cabin. Dozens of them, tall and still as monoliths, their collective gaze a palpable weight. A tapestry of pelts met her eyes, some the color of midnight, others of dusk, and one, a singular beacon, with fur so luminous it seemed spun from moonlight. There were males, broad and powerful, females, their shapes softer, and the young, clinging to the shadows of those who were surely their kin. It was a ring, a perfect, unbroken circle they had woven around her small piece of the world, a living boundary of silent reverence. From the shelter of the shed, the wounded one uttered a sound, a low, guttural vibration that held the ghost of language. And from the circle, several figures answered in kind, their voices rising and falling in a cadence she could feel but never comprehend, a conversation spoken in the forgotten tongue of the wild. Then one broke from the living ring, stepping into the space between. It was the one of white fur, a being of immense size and seemingly immeasurable age, who moved with a grace that spoke of ancient dignities of kings or shamans or whatever sacred role their kind revered. An elder, her soul whispered in recognition. This was an elder. He, for a certainty, settled deep within her that it was he advanced with measured steps toward the shed, halting some 10 feet from her. He turned his gaze upon Margaret, and in their depths, she saw a profound and knowing intelligence that no mere beast could ever possess. His gaze then shifted to the injured one, and he spoke in a series of soft, questioning tones. The wounded creature replied, not with voice, but with the sweep of one enormous hand toward Margaret, each movement deliberate and clear, an unmistakable recounting of a story. The elder listened, his stillness absolute. Then his ancient eyes found Margaret's once more, holding her in a long, contemplative study. Finally, with a slow and solemn grace, he laid a hand across the expanse of his chest and inclined his great head. The gesture was a language unto itself, clearer than any spoken word, a silent, profound expression of gratitude. Thank you. A sudden fire of tears pricked the corners of Margaret's eyes, born of shock, or bone-deep weariness, or the impossible gravity of this moment. In response, she mirrored his gesture, bowing her own head. "You're welcome," she breathed into the sacred silence. The elder rose to his full height, making a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire silent assembly. And then, one by one, they began to advance, their movements not of threat, but of a quiet, almost holy reverence. Each soul approached the shed, their eyes first on the mended one, then on Margaret, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Some echoed the elder's gesture, a hand to the heart. Others offered soft, melodic sounds. Every single one paid her their respects. This was a ceremony she understood with a dawning clarity as the ritual unfolded before her. A sacred rite whose meaning was lost to her, yet whose profound weight she could feel in her very bones. It was a moment of recognition, of acceptance, the forging of an unspoken, unbreakable bond. The young ones approached last, a small procession of them standing barely 5 feet tall, their movements filled with a pure curiosity that knows no species. In their hands, they clutched precious things, fragments of intricately carved wood, iridescent feathers, and stones worn smooth by time. One by one, they tenderly placed these offerings upon her porch. They were gifts. Margaret could only watch, her voice stolen, her breath a shallow tide in an ocean of wonder. After the final offering was laid, the elder gave one last silent command. The mended one fought its way to its feet, the injured leg a testament to its ordeal, and took a limping step forward. The elder moved to its side, a steadying presence, and together they began their solemn journey back to the embrace of the trees. And with their departure, the circle dissolved. The great figures receded into the forest, their forms melting into the shadows as silently as morning mist. In the space of a breath, they had vanished, leaving behind only an echo of their presence, as if they had been a dream all along. And so Margaret stood, a solitary figure in her clearing, encircled by treasures of the wild, as the first rays of the morning sun finally pierced the veil of clouds to bless the world anew. She kept the secret locked within her heart, for who in this world would ever believe such a tale? She scarcely believed it herself, though the memory was seared into her soul, the feel of its fur, the careful work of binding its wounds, the long vigil kept through the dark hours. Yet, in the unforgiving light of day, it all felt as ephemeral as a fever dream, a beautiful phantom conjured by a grieving mind to quiet the aching void. But the gifts were undeniably real. She gathered them from the porch that morning, 17 sacred pieces in all. The wood was carved with intricate, flowing patterns that echoed Celtic knots, yet felt more ancient, more primal. The feathers belonged to no bird she had ever known, shimmering with impossible colors. The stones were polished to a perfect smoothness, some bearing marks that could have been the script of ages or the patient art of water. She enshrined them in a simple box kept beneath her bed, a hidden sanctuary. On nights when the loneliness pressed down like a physical weight, she would take them out and hold them. They were her proof, her evidence. A tangible whisper reminding her that it had not been a dream. The weeks flowed one into the next. October bleeding its russet hues into the gray of November. The first snow arrived like an early promise, dusting the high peaks in white, rendering the world clean and new and breathtakingly fleeting. Margaret settled back into the quiet rhythm of her days of coffee and chores, of walks and books. But the world had been remade. The forest no longer felt empty. The silence was no longer a weight, but a watchful peace. A new habit took root within her. She found her voice on the winding trails, not speaking to the emptiness, but to them, to the silent watchers she felt among the trees. Whether they were truly there, whether they could hear her words, she did not know, but it felt more like a prayer than the ramblings of a lonely woman. "I saw 3 deer this morning," she would murmur, her words becoming mist in the crisp air. "A magnificent buck and 2 does. They allowed me to draw quite near. I think they must sense. I mean them no harm." And the only reply was the sigh of the wind through the pines, the distant call of a bird, and the steady rhythm of her own passage over the fallen leaves. The air is growing colder now. Snow is on its way. She'd confide to the woods. "I hope you all have a warm and safe place to shelter." The silence remained unbroken, and still she continued her quiet conversations, a testament of faith spoken into the wild. And sometimes, in the deep velvet of the night, she would hear them, a subtle stirring in the forest, the distant snap of a twig, the undeniable feeling of a presence just beyond the edge of the light. It was never a threat, but a comforting certainty. They were simply there, watching over her, perhaps even protecting. A profound peace settled over her, granting a slumber more restorative than any she had known in countless seasons. December arrived, cloaked in a heavy mantle of snow, its silent descent rendering the fire road a forgotten path, and Margaret embraced the quiet solitude of winter's keep. Her larder was full, the woodpile stood as a bulwark against the cold, and a tower of unread books promised worlds to explore. She was not merely surviving, she was thriving in the heart of the hush. As the world held its breath on Christmas Eve, she prepared a solitary feast, a tribute to memory, succulent roast chicken, earthy potatoes, and vibrant green beans. She laid the table with the fine china, Thomas's plates, a wedding gift from 43 years past that had spent too long veiled in silence. Candle flames danced, casting a warm glow as she uncorked a bottle and poured a single glass of deep red wine. Lifting her glass to the frosted pane, a fragile barrier against the vast, dark expanse, she whispered a toast into the quiet. "A Merry Christmas, my love, wherever your spirit may roam." Her words were a prayer sent to Thomas, to the unseen denizens of the woods, to any soul, seen or unseen, who might be listening on the wind. And then, from the profound velvet blackness that cradled her home, a sound returned to her. It was not a whisper of the wind, but a voice, low and resonant, gentle yet imbued with a clear and undeniable purpose. It was a howl, yet it carried none of the familiar cadence of wolf or the sharp cry of coyote. This was a sound woven from a different loom, a melody, ancient and unknown. A second voice answered the first, then a third joined the refrain, until a chorus of these ethereal calls swelled and rose, weaving a symphony that ascended into the starlit tapestry of the night. Rooted to the spot before her window, the wine glass forgotten in her hand, Margaret felt the silent fall of tears trace paths down her cheeks. She was not merely listening to a sound, she was receiving a gift, hearing the very soul of the forest sing her a Merry Christmas in return. The winter's grip loosened its hold with agonizing slowness as January bled into the thaw of February. By March, the earth itself began to stir, offering up the first determined jewels of spring, the brave purple of crocuses and the delicate white of snowdrop. Yet, as the world renewed itself, Margaret felt the steady march of her own seasons, a persistent ache in her knee, now demanding the companionship of a cane on her woodland rambles. The indignities of age were a cruel truth, she mused, but a far better fate than the silence that followed. Her thoughts had lately turned inward, circling the profound questions that haunt the quiet hours, the finite nature of a life, the echo one leaves in the world, the faint, indelible mark of a soul's passage. Thomas had always believed their legacy was written in the ledger of healed bodies and mended hearts, in the countless patients they had guided back from the brink, in the families granted more precious time because a nurse's hands were steady and sure. Perhaps he was right, but that chapter felt as though it belonged to another story, its triumphs muted by the haze of memory, abstract and far away. But this silent, sacred communion she had forged with the wild spirits of the forest, this felt immediate and true. It was a connection that pulsed with the rhythm of the living world, a bond that held a weight and a meaning all its own. She had taken to a journal, its blank pages a sanctuary for her memories. With careful script, she chronicled the events of that hallowed night, capturing every nuance, every echo, every fleeting sensation. It was not a tale for the world to consume heavens. No. It was a testament for one, a sacred text to anchor her own belief, irrefutable proof that the magic was real, not a phantom of a lonely mind. One windswept Tuesday toward the end of March. While gathering provisions in the familiar quiet of the town's general store, her attention was caught by the hushed, earnest conversation of two young hikers. "I swear to you, I heard it," the younger man insisted, his voice a low thrum of conviction. "For 3 consecutive nights, that sound in the dark, it's no wolf's cry. Just the yipping of coyotes, maybe." His companion offered, a note of skepticism in his voice. "No, not coyotes," he countered, searching for the words. The tone was too resonant, too. "I can't explain it. It felt measured, like a message." Behind the counter, the man who had been a fixture of the store for decades, Dan, with a last name that always eluded Margaret's memory, let out a dry, dismissive snort. "You fellas are city folk, aren't you? Down from Atlanta?" "From Charlotte, actually," the younger hiker gently corrected him. "Samedi France," Dan grumbled. "Listen, you're not the first folks from off the mountain to come in here with tales of strange sounds. These old hills, they play tricks on the ear. The wind howls through these hollers and can sound like all manner of things. Doesn't mean the old legends are walking around." The two hikers shared a sheepish laugh, paid for their simple trail fare, and with a nod, disappeared back into the world outside. Margaret allowed the silence to settle again before she moved, approaching the worn wooden counter with her own collection of necessities. The dark roast of coffee, the fine dust of flour, the stored energy of batteries, and the sweet solace of chocolate, the very cornerstones of her quiet life. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a shared secret. They heard them, didn't they, Dan? Dan's gaze lifted to meet hers. He was a man of perhaps 70 years who had presided over this store for 4 decades, a living chronicle of every family within a 30-mile circle. His eyes were keen, missing nothing. "Heard what, Ms. Hayes?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The voices on the wind," she affirmed. "The chorus in the night. They heard it." An ocean of silence stretched between them as Dan's hands moved with deliberate slowness, ringing up her items. "Folks hear a great many things in these hills," he said at last, his voice a low rumble. "Most times, it's just the wind sighing, or the weather turning, or the calls of creatures we can name. And the times it isn't?" she pressed gently. Another moment of quiet contemplation passed. Dan finished bagging her goods, his movements precise, before passing them to her. "The rest," he confided, his voice dropping to a near conspiratorial hush, "is a truth best kept by those with the wisdom to hold their tongue. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Margaret held his knowing gaze. "I understand completely." The drive back to her secluded cabin was a journey through a changed landscape, for a profound realization had settled deep within her heart. It was the feeling of not being alone. That was the essence of it. She was not the sole keeper of this incredible secret. Others, the ones whose roots ran deep into this mountain soil, the ones who had truly learned to listen, they knew. They carried the same truth, veiled in a sacred, unspoken pact. Some truths were too vast for language. Their weight could only be carried in the quiet chambers of the heart. As she guided her vehicle to a stop before the cabin, her eyes caught it in an instant. There, on her porch, a deliberate offering before her very door. It was new, placed there within the last few turns of the Sunday, a carving, born of the forest's own heartwood. It was larger than the others, its form more exquisitely rendered. It was a figure humanoid yet otherworldly, with limbs that stretched like reaching branches and a face that was a paradox of the familiar and the alien. Beside it, a smaller form, unmistakably human, undeniably female. Their hands were intertwined, a bridge carved between two worlds. With fingers that trembled, Margaret lifted the effigy. The wood was a silken caress against her skin, still holding the sun's lingering warmth. The artistry was breathtaking, each finger articulated, the very texture of hair etched into the grain, and expressions that seemed to breathe with silent stories. She carried it across the threshold as if it were a sacred relic, placing it upon the mantle where the firelight would dance upon its form. Then she sank into her chair, her gaze fixed, lost in its silent testament. It was an offering, a whisper of gratitude, an unbreakable promise. A silent voice seemed to echo from the wood. Asterisk, you gave sanctuary to one of our own. That debt is etched in memory. Asterisk. It was then that the tears came, a sudden, hot deluge she did not try to stem. She let them fall, a libation for all of it, for Thomas, for the profound ache of her solitude, for the impossible grace of this gift, for the knowing, deep in her bones, that she was seen, that her quiet life, lived out here on the edge of the world, had meaning. Beyond her window, the sun bled into the mountains, bathing the world in a final, glorious gold. A deep and holy quiet settled over the forest. It was peaceful. It was home. Margaret wiped her eyes, rose from her chair, and began the simple ritual of making her supper. Life continued, as it always must. But now, it moved with a newfound rhythm, threaded with purpose and a sacred connection, with the understanding that the universe was a tapestry far wider, wilder, and more wondrous than most souls ever dared to dream. And she was a thread in that tapestry. A humble thread perhaps, but a thread all the same. And that was enough. It was more than enough. In that quiet truth, she had found everything. Spring arrived with a fierce, untamed spirit that year. The snows wept their way back up the mountainside, birthing muddy trails and streams that sang with a swollen voice. Margaret's garden answered the call, her herbs piercing the dark earth. Their green shoots a testament to life's stubborn will. She plunged her hands into the soil, feeling its cool, heavy promise. This was good earth. This was good land. Her birthday arrived with the April rains. 64 years. She honored it as she did most days now, with coffee on the porch, a silent witness to the world's awakening. Filled with gratitude for one more journey around the Sunday, Thomas would have been 67, would have been, The phrase was still a shard of glass in her heart, but the grief had softened its shape with the passing of seasons. It was no longer the sudden, shearing agony of the early days. It was more like an old wound, a deep ache that resonated with the changing weather, a constant companion, but one she had learned to live with. It was now part of the very landscape of her soul. She was lost in these thoughts, meditating on time and age and the gentle erosion of all things, when a new sound broke the morning stillness. The soft press of footsteps, advancing up the path that led to her door. Margaret placed her mug down with a steady hand and rose to her feet. Her fingers found the canister of bear spray on her belt, a gesture born of long habit, though a part of her knew it was a meager defense against the true wilderness. Yet, what approached was not a threat. It was him. The ancient one, the one whose fur was the color of winter moonlight. He walked alone, his pace measured and profound, making no effort to conceal his approach. He was an emissary, not an intruder. He paused at the border of her small clearing, some 20 feet from her porch, and simply waited. Margaret descended the wooden steps. "Hello," she breathed, the word feeling small and utterly human, yet it was the only offering she had. The elder regarded her with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Then he reached into a worn leather satchel that hung across his great shoulder and withdrew something with gentle care. He held it aloft for her to see. It was a plant, complete with its tangle of roots, its vibrant leaves, and blossoms like tiny white stars. Margaret did not know its name, but she recognized the presence of powerful medicine when she saw it. The elder made a slow, deliberate gesture, a pantomime of bringing something to his mouth. Asterisk, this is to be taken in. Asterisk, then he motioned to his own heart, and then to hers. Asterisk, a gift of wellness, a gift of strength. You are offering me a healing, Margaret whispered, the realization dawning on her. The elder inclined his head in a gesture so human it stole her breath, as if he understood not just her tone, but the very words themselves. He took 3 silent steps forward, laid the sacred plant upon the earth between them, and then retreated. Margaret moved toward it slowly, kneeling to retrieve the offering. The roots were dense and vital, the leaves a waxy, deep green. It carried a sharp, clean scent, a fragrance of the deep woods that she had never encountered in any medical text. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with the profound weight of the moment. The elder laid a weathered hand over his heart, a gesture that spoke volumes where words could not, a silent testament of gratitude, a bridge of connection. And then, with a grace born of the wild, he turned and was swallowed by the forest, vanishing between the ancient trunks as if he were nothing more than a whisper of smoke. Margaret remained rooted in her sun-dappled clearing, the delicate plant cradled in her hands, its living weight a mirror to the profound gravity of the moment. A quiet truth settled in her soul. They were still here, their unseen eyes a silent guardianship, their presence a soft echo of caring in the vast wilderness. She carried the precious gift inside, where the afternoon sunlight streamed through her window, and lost herself in its study. Her pencil danced across the pages of her journal, capturing its unique form, while her reference books, filled with the knowledge of her world, offered only silence. No species matched, and a quiet understanding bloomed within her. This was not a plant of her world, but a secret from theirs. This was a page from their ancient pharmacy, a remedy that flourished in the deep heart of the forest, far from where human paths are ever forged. With a delicate reverence, she dried a few of the leaves and steeped them into a tea, an infusion that tasted of the bitter, ancient earth itself. She drank it without hesitation, and a gentle warmth blossomed in her chest, spreading like a slow river through her weary limbs. And the stubborn ache in her knee, a companion for weeks, began to recede, not vanished, but softened into a quiet, noticeable peace. Was this some fleeting magic? No, it was something far more grounded, far more real. It was medicine, an ancient wisdom passed down through generations of beings who had deciphered the mountain's deepest secrets long before humankind arrived with its thunderous chainsaws and the cold geometry of survey stakes. Margaret returned to her journal, her pen moving with a newfound purpose to chronicle this gift. She rendered the plant in intricate detail, her sketches capturing every vein and curve, and her words describing the taste of the earth and the gentle unfolding of its healing. She was gathering this knowledge for a future she could not name, a legacy for herself, or perhaps for someone else who might one day need to understand. Over the passing months, the journal had grown thick and heavy, its hundreds of pages, a tapestry of careful observations, delicate drawings, and whispered encounters, a sacred record of a life that, by all accounts, was never meant to exist. She kept this chronicle swaddled in oilcloth, a precious thing sealed within a metal box and laid to rest beneath the floorboards of her room. It was safe there, a secret held in the heart of her home. For Dan at the general store had spoken a simple truth. Some knowledge isn't meant for telling. Some burdens are meant to be carried in the quiet chambers of the heart. Yet, to bear this silent knowledge was not a burden, but a profound privilege. To simply know, to be a witness, was more than enough. The summer sun brought with it a tide of tourists, a vibrant, noisy river of humanity flooding the trails in their bright, synthetic gear. They came armed with the gadgets of their world, their loud voices shattering the mountain's peace and their carelessness scarring the landscape. So Margaret became a creature of the liminal hours, altering her rhythm to walk in the sacred quiet of early morning and the gentle hush of twilight, when the forest belonged once more to itself. Yet, on one sweltering July afternoon, as she journeyed homeward from a long sojourn in the hills, she happened upon a tableau of distress beside the trail. A couple, perhaps in their 30s, sat in a small clearing of their own making. The woman's face was streaked with tears, while the man stood by, a study in devoted helplessness. "Are you all right?" Margaret's voice was a gentle intrusion into their private sorrow as she paused on the path. The man's eyes, filled with a weary frustration, met hers. "A twisted ankle," he explained, his voice strained. "It's quite bad. I tried to call for help, but the mountain refuses to grant us a signal." Margaret's experienced gaze fell upon the woman's ankle, already a painful bloom of purple against her skin, a clear sign of a severe sprain, or perhaps worse. "I have a cabin, not more than a mile from this spot," she offered calmly. "There's a landline there that always works, and I have some medical training. Allow me to see what I can do." From the well-worn depths of her pack, she fashioned a splint with the simple tools she always carried, a roll of elastic bandage and two sturdy limbs gathered from the forest floor. Then, with the husband tenderly supporting his wife, Margaret guided their slow and careful procession back through the trees to the sanctuary of her home. Within the comforting quiet of her cabin, she settled the woman upon her couch, her leg elevated and cooled with ice. She then used her old telephone to summon help, reciting the cabin's coordinates with a calm precision, knowing the injury required the deeper medicine of x-rays and a doctor's care. In the quiet moments while they waited, the man's gaze drifted around the simple, peaceful room. "Do you truly live out here all alone?" he asked, a note of wonder in his voice. "I do," she affirmed with a soft smile. "But isn't it? I mean, don't you ever feel afraid?" he pressed gently. "So far from everything? All by yourself?" A serene smile graced Margaret's face. "No," she answered, her voice as steady as the mountain. "I am not scared. But the bears?" he reasoned. "The mountain lions. And, well, people talk about." He lowered his voice to a near whisper, as if speaking the name aloud might conjure the legend from the trees. "Bigfoot." From the couch, his wife offered a faint, weary laugh. "Oh, honey, Bigfoot isn't real." Margaret let the silence answer for her. Her enigmatic smile, a gentle veil over all she knew, as she moved to the stove to brew them a comforting tea for the remainder of their wait. It arrived 40 minutes later, a tempest of sound and wind, its thundering rotors bending the tall pines in a powerful downdraft. She led them out to the clearing she had designated, where the world of quiet nature gave way to the swift, practiced hands of paramedics who took charge, easing the woman onto a stretcher and attending to her vitals. Just before the ascent, the man turned back to Margaret, his voice a desperate shout against the roaring blades. "Thank you!" he cried out, his sincerity cutting through the noise. "You truly saved us!" "I only did what anyone would do," she called back, her words nearly carried away by the wind. But as the helicopter climbed, a shrinking silhouette against the southern sky, Her mind lingered on his words. She thought about the nature of saving, about the ephemeral, powerful connections forged in moments of vulnerability, and how a single act of help can send ripples outward into the world in ways one can never truly see or measure. She had offered her help to a creature of the forest on that long ago October night, and in return, they had helped her. They had given her a reason, a sense of silent community, and an anchor to hold when the weight of her solitude threatened to pull her under. Perhaps, she mused, that was the only true work any of us are here to do: to offer help where it is needed, to share kindness when it matters most, and to weave connections across the silent, unseen boundaries that so often divide us. It was a truth at once so simple and so profound. It was, in the quiet accounting of a life, the only thing that truly mattered. By the heart of August, a heavy, unyielding heat had pressed itself into the mountains, a tangible weight upon the land. The very air grew dense and humid, a suffocating blanket that made each breath a conscious effort. In this sweltering stillness, Margaret sought refuge in the cool embrace of shadows, her movements measured and deliberate, a careful dance to conserve the precious threads of her energy. For at the winter of her years, such a fervent heat was not merely a discomfort, it was a silent, looming peril. One twilight, as she sat upon her porch, a silent sentinel searching for the faintest whisper of a breeze in the breathless world, a sound broke the quiet, the unmistakable rhythm of their approach. This time, there was no pretense of stealth, no effort to conceal their passage. They walked with an open declaration, their deliberate footsteps snapping branches in their wake, a percussive announcement of their presence. The cadence of the sounds wove a story in the air, a tale of three souls journeying toward her cabin, emerging from the direction of the fading western Sunday. Margaret rose to her feet, her hand finding the steady comfort of the porch rail, and in the deepening twilight, she simply waited. And then they stepped from the sanctuary of the trees, silhouetted against a sky ablaze with the sun's final, glorious descent. A masterpiece painted in hues of liquid gold and warm amber. Two towering adults stood as guardians on either side of a younger figure, perhaps 6 feet in height, possessed of that endearing, awkward grace of adolescence that knows no boundary of species. A subtle but undeniable falter marked the young one's gait, a gentle limp, a careful favoring of its left foot that spoke of a hidden pain. In that single, poignant observation, a wave of understanding washed over Margaret. The truth settled into her heart with absolute certainty. They had come seeking her help, bringing her a patient. She descended the porch steps, her own movements slow and unthreatening, her hands held open in a universal gesture of peace. "Let me see," she murmured, her voice a soft current in the still air. The adolescent turned its gaze to the two adults, its parents, she felt sure, and in response, they uttered low, resonant sounds that flowed with a tone she had come to recognize as encouragement, a granting of permission. With a trust that humbled her, the young one moved forward, each step a careful measure of pain, and upon reaching her, it settled to the ground with a weary sigh, extending the wounded leg as an offering. Margaret knelt upon the cool earth, her own aging knees voicing a quiet protest. Before her, the foot was terribly swollen, the source a deep puncture marring its soul. A venomous infection was clearly taking hold, its angry red tendrils creeping outward, radiating a feverish heat she could feel even before she touched it. "You've stepped on something sharp," Margaret mused aloud. The words meant more to soothe than to inquire. A cruel thorn, perhaps. Or a forgotten nail, if your path led you too close to the remnants of man's world. Rising again, she gestured toward the welcoming light of her cabin. "You must wait here," she conveyed with a look and emotion. "I will return with what is needed." Within the familiar quiet of her home, she gathered her well-worn medical kit, its contents a litany of healing, broad-spectrum antibiotics, the clean sting of antiseptic, rolls of white bandages, and her own time-honored herbal salve. She added a bottle of simple pain relievers, a quiet acknowledgement of the more potent remedies she could no longer procure. When she returned, she found the three of them waiting in the gathering dusk, a silent tableau of patience. They were a study in unwavering trust. Her first task was to cleanse the wound. The young one winced at the sharp touch, but remained stoically still. Margaret could feel the weight of the parents' gaze upon her, a silent, protective vigil, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of harm, yet allowing her to continue her work. The depth of the faith they placed in her was a staggering, humbling thing. Gently, she expressed the poison and grit from the puncture, and a low sound escaped the young one's throat, a note impossible to decipher, caught somewhere between agony and release. The antiseptic brought another, sharper cry, followed by a softer sigh as she packed the cool, soothing salve deep into the injury. At last, She wrapped it all in clean, tight bandages. "These are antibiotics," she explained, holding the small pills in her palm for them to see. "They must be taken 3 times each day, once with the morning light, once at midday, and once as evening falls. With food, if it is possible." She then became a storyteller of motion, pantomiming the act of eating, followed by the swallowing of a pill. She repeated this silent narrative 3 times. The parents observed her every move, their faces, and yes, she could read their faces, now etched with focused, profound intent. One of the parents then reached into a worn leather pouch at its side, withdrawing a bundle carefully wrapped in broad, green leaves. It was offered to her with a gesture of solemn grace. Margaret accepted the offering with gentle hands. As she peeled back the leaves, she discovered a gift of sustenance. Meat that had been expertly dried, salted, and preserved. The scent and texture spoke to her of venison. It was payment, a gesture of exchange, a sacred transaction. They were paying her for her care. "Thank you," Margaret whispered, her voice thick with an unexpected swell of emotion. "But truly, you did not have to." But the parent raised a hand, a gesture that was not unkind, but firm, insistent. This was not a gift to be refused. This was a matter of honor, of an ancient protocol. Understanding dawned, and Margaret inclined her head in acceptance. "Then I thank you," she said, meeting their gaze. "This is a most generous offering." They lingered for another hour, a quiet communion as the last vestiges of sunlight bled from the sky and the first stars began to bloom. Margaret entrusted them with a bottle of antibiotics, confident in their intelligence to decipher its use, and provided extra bandages for a fresh dressing. She demonstrated how to watch for the warning signs of a worsening infection, a lesson conveyed through touch and gesture. Throughout this gentle instruction, the young one remained quiet, voicing only occasional, soft sound. Each time, the parents would respond with their own low rumbles, and it felt to Margaret as though they were translating her silent care into their own tongue. A conversation was unfolding in a language she could not speak, yet whose meaning she could feel on the very edge of her understanding. As they prepared to depart, the young one reached out and touched her hand, a brief, gentle contact that conveyed a world of gratitude. And then, as silently as they had come, all 3 of them dissolved back into the deep shadows of the forest, leaving Margaret standing alone once more beneath the starlit sky. Later that night, by the warm glow of her lamp, she unwrapped the leafy parcel and sampled a piece of the meat. It was exquisite, perfectly seasoned with the wild herbs of the mountain. They were masters of their own world. She opened her journal and added a new entry to its pages, her pen scratching in the quiet. She described the wound, the treatment she had rendered, and the solemn payment she had received. More evidence slowly accumulating, a faithful record of all the impossible, wonderful things. The seasons turned their great, silent wheel, and autumn returned, spilling September's light into the deep well of October. A full year had passed since that first fateful night, an anniversary Margaret observed in quiet reverence, with a pot of soup simmering on the stove, a vigil on her porch, and a heart that replayed the symphony of rain, the stain of blood, and the singular, shattering moment when her world was remade. Her knee had become a more stubborn companion in her pain. The medicine offered a fragile truce, but it could not halt the inexorable march of time. Her movements grew more deliberate, a slower dance with gravity, and the cane became a more constant friend. There were mornings when 20 minutes dissolved into the struggle of simply rising, her body a fragile vessel cataloging the morning's aches and whispered complaints. The journey into one's elder years, she mused, was a thief with no manners and a heart of stone. And yet she remained, a stubborn breath against the window pane of existence, a living thread woven into the strange and wondrous tapestry she had stumbled upon in these woods. Then, on a morning crisp with October's chill, she awoke to a miracle laid upon her porch, a silent, sacred offering. Dozens of gifts blanketed the weathered wood, intricate carvings, the iridescent gleam of feathers, stones worn smooth by ancient waters, and sustenance for the body strips of dried meat, a bounty of nuts, and berries suspended like jewels in a sweet amber syrup. Among them lay medicinal plants whose secrets she was slowly learning, each item placed with a reverence that spoke of solemn purpose. The givers had vanished like morning mist, leaving no trace of their passage, but in the quiet chambers of her heart, Margaret knew. A full circle of the Sunday, they were honoring the passage of 1 year. And so she stood there, a small figure on her porch wrapped in a simple nightgown and her absurdly fuzzy slippers, gazing upon the bounty, and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it crested into a beautiful, breathtaking ache within her soul. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a fragile offering to the vast, listening forest. Thank you for welcoming me into this sacred circle." The forest offered no reply in a language of words, yet from the deep cathedral of the trees, a sound arose, a low, gentle resonance that mimicked the wind but carried the weight of something more. It was the sound of acknowledgement, a bridge of connection forged in the quiet air. It was a promise whispered without a voice. "We are here. You are not alone." That second winter descended with a fierce and unyielding grip. The snow began its silent invasion early and refused all retreat, until by November, the fire road was but a memory buried beneath 3 feet of immaculate white. Margaret was an island in a sea of snow, yet she was provisioned with ample wood stacked high and a quiet sense of peace. The visits from her forest neighbors grew more frequent, their presence a comforting shadow. Though they often remained unseen, she could hear the soft stirrings of their passage around her cabin in the deep of night, a silent, watchful patrol, a gentle inquiry into her well-being. On one night of singular, biting cold when the temperature plunged past the threshold of 0 and the wind howled like a famished spirit, a soft, insistent scratching summoned her to the door. Margaret rose from the warmth of her fireside chair, drawing a thick blanket around her shoulders like a shield, and unlatched the door to face the night. 2 figures stood sentinel on her porch, cloaked in falling snow, not the elder, but 2 in their prime, their immense forms dusted white. In their arms, they cradled offerings of wood, great heavy logs, larger than any she could have hoped to split with her own weary hands. It was a gift against the cold. They had brought her firewood. She moved aside in silent invitation, and they entered, stooping their great heads to pass beneath the doorframe. They moved with a surprising grace, a gentle awareness of the fragile, human world within her walls. With meticulous care, they stacked the wood beside her hearth, their work neat and precise, before their gaze fell upon the small, struggling flames that fought a losing battle against the encroaching chill. One of them knelt, the cabin's old bones groaning in protest under the immense weight, and began to reconstruct her fire. With an expertise that spoke of ancient, inherited wisdom, it laid a foundation of massive logs, topped them with kindling, and arranged it all into a perfect architecture of flame. When the work was done, the fire erupted into a roaring, vibrant heart, pouring a wave of life-giving heat into the room. Wrapped in her blanket, Margaret could only stand and watch. A silent witness to this profound act of kindness, the words she sought lost somewhere between her heart and her lips. They rose again to their full height, ever mindful of the low ceiling, and exchanged a series of soft, guttural sounds, a quiet language of confirmation passing between them. Then, their ancient eyes turned to her. One of them brought a hand to rest over the center of its broad chest, performing the gestures she now knew so well, a silent oath, a declaration that held the weight of everything that mattered. "Thank you," Margaret managed to say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so thank you." They departed as they had arrived, like phantoms into the swirling snow, pulling the door gently closed behind them. And there, bathed in the radiant warmth of her newly roaring fire, Margaret finally let her tears fall. They were not tears of sorrow, but of something far more potent. It was the liquid form of gratitude, the overwhelming sense of belonging, the profound and soul-deep realization that even in this profound isolation, she was not forgotten. She was cared for. For 6 long years, she had run from the specter of loneliness. 6 years spent wrestling with the hollow echo of an empty life. But she saw now that the emptiness was an illusion. Her life wasn't empty. It was overflowing, brimming with a silent, powerful connection, a newfound purpose, and a love that needed no human language to be understood. That night, she surrendered to a sleep more peaceful and profound than any she had known since the day she lost Thomas. The winter that followed was a titan of cold, the most formidable Margaret had ever known. It was a cold with a physical weight, a presence that seeped into the marrow of your bones and made them ache in a primal language older than memory. By January, for 3 relentless weeks, the world had not thawed, and the fire road had vanished completely, entombed beneath snow that had hardened into a glacial shield. By all mortal reckoning, Margaret was utterly cut off from the world. And yet, she had never been less alone. Their nocturnal visits had become a silent, sacred ritual, a pilgrimage under the stars. They never again crossed her threshold. That first desperate night was an exception born of necessity. But she would hear the whisper of their movements around her small home, a quiet guardianship as they checked her woodpile, swept snow from her porch, and left offerings at her door. Sustenance, mostly. They understood her isolation. They were ensuring the winter would not claim her. Margaret, in her own way, sought to answer their grace. She would leave small treasures in return, bags of sun-dried fruit purchased in the warmth of August, golden jars of honey, and fragrant tea. Humble offerings, human offerings. By the dawn's first light, they were always gone. It was a communion of a kind, a conversation spoken not in words, but in gifts and gestures across the profound, silent chasm that separated their species. On a morning etched by the deep frost of late January, she awoke to a miracle of engineering and care. Her entire cabin was embraced by a windbreak they had fashioned in the darkness, a tapestry of woven branches, pine boughs, and packed snow that stood as a bastion against the biting gales. The air inside her home held a new and noticeable warmth. Margaret stood in her doorway, her eyes tracing the lines of their incredible work, and felt a tectonic shift deep within her chest. It was not a breaking, it was an opening, as if a door within her soul, rusted shut for decades, had just been swung wide to the light. She had devoted so much of her existence to the mending of others. For 37 years, she had patched up the broken, sent them back to their lives, and moved on to the next crisis. A life of service that had somehow kept her from true connection, from ever learning the grace of receiving help herself. But this was something wholly different. This was a sacred exchange. This was the quiet, beating heart of community. Her thoughts drifted to Thomas, a gentle ghost in the sunlit dust motes. She wondered how his pragmatic soul would have processed this beautiful impossibility. He was always the skeptic, the man of reason. Yet, his heart was kind. He would have understood the profound kindness of it, even as the sheer reality of it sent his logical mind into a tailspin. "If only you could see this," she whispered to the listening silence of the cabin. "I wish you were here." But he was not. And she was learning, in the slow, tender way of healing, that being alive meant continuing on in the absence of those you have lost. It meant discovering new threads of connection, new anchors for the soul. It meant allowing the world to astonish you just when you thought all its wonders had been revealed. February arrived bearing a gift of warmth. The snow softened to slush, and the armor of ice on the fire road began to weep. Margaret knew this thaw was a fleeting promise. More snow would surely fall before winter truly surrendered, but it was a reprieve, a moment to simply breathe. She bundled herself in layers and embarked on her first true walk in what felt like an eternity. Her legs were unsteady from disuse, and her knee sang a sharp song of protest with every step. But oh, the divine feeling of motion, to be outside, to be woven back into the fabric of the world. She followed the familiar trail that meandered east from her cabin, the one that climbed to a small overlook with a view that drank the horizon. The trees stood in silent congregation around her, their boughs heavy with damp snow. Her boots left deep, solitary prints in the white canvas. Perhaps half a mile into her journey, she saw them, 5 of them, assembled in a clearing just off the path. They made no effort to hide. They were waiting for her. Margaret stilled, her hand instinctively brushing against her bear spray, though the gesture was now only a phantom of a former fear. She was not afraid. A year had passed since fear had any place in her heart when she saw them. The elder was there, the patriarch with the fur of spun snow, who now seemed to wear his years with even greater dignity than she recalled. Time, it seemed, etched its story upon them too. Beside him stood the one she had saved on that first fateful night. She knew him by the faint, silver scar that traced his thigh, a mark visible even through his thick coat. And there were 3 others, new to her eyes, younger, perhaps in what would be their 20s in human years. They regarded her with a bright, open curiosity, entirely devoid of fear. The elder stepped forward, a single, deliberate movement. He made a gesture, a simple, profound invitation to come. Margaret hesitated for only a heartbeat. And then, with a quiet surrender of trust, she followed. They guided her away from the known path, deeper into the forest's sacred heart, through a wild terrain she could never have hoped to navigate alone. They moved with a gentle pace, glancing back to ensure she was near, offering strong hands to steady her over fallen trees and through deep, pillowy drifts of snow. After 20 minutes of this silent pilgrimage, they came to a place Margaret had never known. A clearing, maybe half an acre in size, cradled by a circle of old-growth trees that must have been seedlings before Europeans ever dreamt of this continent. It was an ancient place, a hallowed place, in the way some places simply are. In the very center of the clearing stood a structure. It was less a building and more a shelter that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. A dome of intricately woven branches and hides, bound with materials Margaret could not identify. It was primitive, yet possessed a breathtaking elegance. It radiated purpose. The elder gestured toward it. Then, with his hands, he told her a story in silent motion, a figure lying down, hands clutching its middle in pain. Sickness. Someone was ailing within. The truth settled over her with the weight of a profound honor. They had brought her here to be a healer. Margaret gave a slow, measured nod. "Let me see," she said, her voice a quiet oath. They led her inside the dwelling. It was filled with a surprising warmth, born either of some clever, natural insulation or simply the collective body heat of those who had kept vigil. Light filtered through openings in the roof, casting the interior in a soft, cathedral-like glow. On a bed of piled furs lay the patient. A female, Margaret thought, a matriarch by the look of her. The fur around her face was a soft silver gray, and her hands were gnarled with what looked like the familiar cruelty of arthritis. Her breathing was a shallow, labored whisper in the stillness. Margaret knelt beside her, her own joints protesting the movement. "Hey there," she murmured, her voice a gentle balm. "Let's see what's wrong." A flicker of life returned as the ailing creature's eyelids parted, revealing orbs dark and clouded with a storm of pain, yet within them, a resilient spark of awareness still held its ground. Margaret's hand, a gentle bridge between two worlds, came to rest upon the creature's brow, only to feel the searing heat of a raging fever. She drew back the heavy furs that veiled the body, and the source of the agony revealed itself at once, an abdomen stretched taut, as rigid as stone beneath her touch. A delicate press, meant only to diagnose, drew a sharp, involuntary shudder from the suffering form. The diagnosis bloomed in her mind, a familiar and dreaded word: appendicitis. Or, at the very least, its shadow, a deep-seated infection, coiled and virulent, perhaps mere moments from bursting its deadly poison forth. "All right," Margaret breathed, her thoughts racing like a river current. "All right, the darkness is deep, but there is a path through it. This can be mended. I will need—" Her gaze found the elder, and her hands began a silent, desperate dance, painting pictures in the air of the healing she required. Her mind flew to her distant cabin, to the potent medicine saved from a lifetime of mending human frailties, the powerful antibiotics from her days in the emergency room. While the life-giving drip of an IV was a ghost of a memory, the power to quiet the pain was still within her grasp. A light of comprehension dawned in the elder's ancient eyes. A single, resonant sound escaped his lips, a command that carried the weight of ages, and in a blur, a younger one was gone, a fleeting shadow on a mission of hope. Returning to the patient's side, she offered a promise woven from hope and uncertainty. "You will find your way back to us," she whispered, even as her heart knew that a life at this precipice, without a surgeon's blade, was a fragile thing balanced on the knife's edge of fate. Still, she'd witnessed miracles born of medicine and sheer will before. In the long, suspended moments of waiting, she became a guardian. Her fingers traced the frantic, yet strong rhythm of a pulse, her ears attuned to the cadence of each breath as she battled the relentless fire of the fever with makeshift poultices of snow packed in supple hides. A silent circle of kin held vigil with her, their large eyes reflecting the firelight and their own profound concern. Among them were the smaller forms of the young, their soft murmurs of distress, a universal language, a melody of fear that needed no interpreter. It was the sacred tableau of family, a tapestry of love and fear woven around one of their own cherished souls. The young messenger returned with a swiftness that defied belief, a whisper of wind and purpose, bearing not just what was asked, but the entire sanctuary of her healing arts, her medical kit, retrieved from a cabin they somehow knew, a testament to their profound and startling understanding. A wave of astonishment washed over her. Their intelligence was not just present, it was a brilliant, shining thing. With practiced haste, Margaret began her work. Lacking the ideal, she embraced the possible, crushing the powerful broad-spectrum tablets, a silent prayer of thanks for her foresight into a fine powder. She mixed this sacred dust with water and gently coaxed the healing potion past the sick one's lips, a dose measured not for man, but for a being of thrice his stature. Then followed the balms for pain and the agents to quell the fever's fire, an emptying of her arsenal in this singular, desperate battle for a life. And now, our watch begins, she conveyed to the elder, her voice a low hum. We look for the fever's retreat, for the softening of this hardened battlefield. If it hardens further, if she begins to bring up blood, her hands spoke of graver signs, then the shadow will have truly fallen upon us. The elder's solemn nod was a testament, a silent acknowledgement that he had heard both her words and the unspoken weight that lay behind them. For 6 long hours, Margaret remained a steadfast sentinel, pouring the wisdom of 3 decades of emergency nursing into this one fragile life. As the 4th hour waned, the fever's iron grip began to loosen. In the 5th, the patient's eyes fluttered open, and a soft sound, the first note of relief's quiet song, escaped her lips. Beneath her gentle touch, the rigid landscape of the abdomen had yielded, a subtle but undeniable sign that the medicine was winning its silent war within. "The path to wholeness now lies in rest," Margaret explained, her voice filled with gentle authority, and in the continued fight of these small white stones, her hand swept over her kit, an offering, I will leave all I possess. Every 6 hours, she must have these, she instructed, holding the pills aloft in a clear and simple lesson. The elder received the small tokens of life into his palm, his grave nod a sacred vow to continue her work. As Margaret rose, an orchestra of pain from 6 hours of kneeling cried out in her own weary body, and a great, steadying hand from the elder met her, a silent anchor in her exhaustion. I believe the light will return to her, Margaret said, her voice a thread of weary confidence. But should the shadows gather again, you must come for me. Whether in the sun's full gaze or the moon's quiet reign, I will answer your call. In response, the elder laid his hand upon his heart, the profound, silent gesture that spoke volumes where words would fail, a symbol of a bond forged in crisis. From the depths of a leather pouch, he then drew a small, carefully wrapped parcel, extending it to her not as payment, but as a sacred offering. With reverent fingers, she unfurled the leather to reveal a necklace of humble, breathtaking beauty. A cord of woven fibers holding a constellation of intricately carved beads, polished bone, and stones that pulsed with a soft, ethereal light in the cavern's gloom. This is too much. I cannot possibly, the words of refusal began to form on her lips. But the elder gently pressed the gift into her palms, his insistence a quiet, powerful force. Her heart understood then. This was not a transaction. It was an anointment, an honor, a symbol that she was no longer an outsider, but a recognized soul within their circle. In that moment, a profound truth settled over her. She belonged. She was their healer. She was a part of their tribe. Margaret raised the necklace over her head, and as it came to rest against her heart, she felt its warmth, its weight, its undeniable rightness, as if it were a piece of her own soul she had just reclaimed. A single heartfelt whisper escaped her, carrying the weight of all she felt. Thank you. The journey homeward, a pilgrimage of 1 hour, was a path she did not walk alone. 2 of the younger souls shadowed her steps, silent guardians ensuring her safe return. Upon reaching the threshold of her clearing, their touch on her hands was a fleeting, tender benediction before they melted back into the deep green heart of the woods. Margaret crossed into her sanctuary, her hands trembling as she brewed a cup of tea, a simple ritual to ground a spirit soaring in disbelief. She settled by the hearth, letting the fire's warmth chase the chill from her bones and the wonder from her soul. She was 64 winters into her life story. The chapter with her husband had closed. The volume of her career was finished and shelved. On most days, her body felt like a fragile vessel, a collection of tired pieces that no longer moved, in perfect concert. Yet here, in this sacred hidden place, among these beings born of myth and shadow, she found a truth that eclipsed all loss. She mattered. And that singular, breathtaking realization was worth more than all the world she had ever known. Spring was a hesitant guest that year. March clung on with a brutal, icy grip, blanketing the world in more snow, in a cold so deep it felt like a memory of winter's ghost. But April, at last, arrived like a whispered promise, and with its warmth came the slow, sacred resurrection of the earth. Life returned to Margaret's garden, a defiant tapestry of green pushing through the dormant brown, each sprout a testament to its hunger for the Sunday. She knelt and worked the soil, her hands planting seeds while her voice whispered to the earth as if it were a listening friend. Perhaps it was. In this new world, all her old certainties had fallen away like leaves. The one she had feared lost had survived the long winter. The truth of it arrived at her cabin in the heart of April, a living miracle brought forth from the woods, walking slowly, deliberately, but walking, healed. With careful, measured steps, the matriarch approached Margaret on the porch. A massive hand, a thing of immense power, rose and cupped Margaret's cheek with a tenderness that spoke volumes. The gesture was a silent poem of gratitude, its meaning as clear as daylight. It was a touch that said, "Thank you. You have given me back my life." Margaret raised her own hand to rest upon that great one. "You're welcome," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I am just so glad to see you well." From a pouch at her side, the matriarch produced a small, exquisitely carved figure. It was a woman, unmistakably Margaret, rendered in wood with an artist's eye, capturing the curve of her cane and the silver hair gathered in a familiar bun. With fingers that trembled, Margaret accepted the precious gift. "It's beautiful," she breathed, the words barely a whisper. "It's thank you." A low, gentle sound rumbled from the matriarch's chest, a sound of peace and closure. Then she turned and receded into the embrace of the forest, leaving Margaret standing on her porch, cradling an effigy of herself sculpted by hands the world insisted could not exist. She placed it on the mantel beside its companion, 2 small figures now joined in a silent, wooden clasp of hands. They were her evidence. her proof, her sacred reminders that the impossible is merely that which we have not yet been blessed to witness. As the days grew long and warm, summer brought a visitor of a kind Margaret had never anticipated. She was tending her garden, lost in a quiet conversation with the weeds and the ache in her back, when the unfamiliar growl of an engine disturbed the peace of the fire road. It was a sound so rare in her secluded world, where perhaps 3 visitors a year might find her officials on duty, or a wayward hiker who had mistaken a warning for a suggestion. The truck that emerged into her clearing bore the emblem of the Forest Service. A woman of perhaps 35 years, clad in the familiar green uniform, stepped out. She approached with a deliberate, polite caution that signaled she was here on more than just a social call. "Mrs. Hayes? My name is Ranger Sarah Martinez from the district office in Asheville. I was hoping I might borrow a few moments of your time." "Of course," Margaret replied, rising with the slow grace of her years. "Would you care for some tea?" They settled on the porch, the old world and the new, as Margaret poured tea and Ranger Martinez produced a tablet and a notebook, the tools of her trade. "I won't beat around the bush," Ranger Martinez began, her voice steady. "We've been receiving reports, a great many of them, in fact. Hikers are seeing things, hearing things, experiencing strange encounters in the backcountry all through this region. And a curious number of those reports seem to originate within a 5-mile radius of this very cabin." Margaret brought the warm cup to her lips, taking a slow sip. "Is that a fact?" she murmured. "Some of what we're hearing is, well, it's far from ordinary. People claim to have seen what they can only describe as large primates moving through the trees. Others tell stories of being helped when they were lost or hurt. One man swears on his life that something carried him 3 miles to safety after he shattered his leg." The ranger paused, her gaze thoughtful. "You've been living up here for, what, 6 years now? It will be 7 come this November. In all that time, have you ever witnessed anything unusual?" Margaret held the young ranger's gaze, and in the quiet space between them, she thought of the journal hidden beneath her floorboards, of the 2 carved figures standing sentinel on her mantle, of the precious necklace that rested, even now, against her heart. "That would depend," she said softly, "on your definition of unusual." A knowing smile touched Ranger Martinez's lips. "That's about what I figured." She closed her tablet, setting it aside. "Listen, speaking off the record, I was born and raised in these mountains. My grandmother, she told stories. Stories of things she'd seen that defied every law of science. I never believed her back then. But the longer I walk these trails, the more I suspect she wasn't just spinning tales." "And what is the official opinion of the Forest Service?" Margaret asked, her eyes never leaving the rangers. "On the record, it's all just mistaken identities, tricks of the light, the whispers of the wind through the pines. But off the record," Martinez offered a weary shrug. "We aren't fools. We feel the truth of this place in our bones. We have for generations. But what choice have we ever had? To sound the alarm? To unleash a carnival of cameras and chaos? To invite every soul with a rifle and a thirst for glory into these sacred woods? And so you guard them with your silence. We guard them with our silence. We gently steer people from the hollows where they dwell. We answer the calls when trouble finds someone. We keep the pathways clear. And we hold a quiet faith that whatever secrets live in these mountains wish for solitude as deeply as we wish to grant it." Martinez leaned in, her voice a low hum. "But this is where the story changes. You, Margaret, are the closest soul to what we believe is their heartland. And the whispers we hear on the wind say they are watchful. Specifically, of you." Margaret offered neither confirmation nor dissent, letting the steam from her teacup write its own silent reply in the cool mountain air. "I'm not here to pry a story from you that you're not ready to tell," Martinez went on, her tone softening. "I am only saying that if there is a truth to these whispers, if you have forged some manner of kinship with them, that is a profound and sacred thing. It is a treasure, and the Forest Service would be deeply grateful to know you stand as a kind of an emissary, I suppose, a bridge between 2 worlds. And if I am nothing more than what I appear to be, then you are a woman who has found her peace in the wilderness, and that is a life to be honored." Martinez rose to her feet. "But if you are more, if they have placed their trust in you, then I am asking for your help in protecting them, because one day the storm will break. Someone will capture proof, not a shadow, not a blur, but something real and undeniable. And when that day comes, this sanctuary will be overrun. We must be ready for that flood." Margaret let the weight of that future settle in her heart. She pictured the intrusion of cameras and the clamor of crowds, the slow, inevitable bleeding of wonder from the world. She thought of the silent ones who had mended her solitude, who had given her a reason to watch the sun rise, who had woven her into the fabric of something ancient and profound. "I will let the mountains consider it," she said at last. Martinez placed a small card in her hand, a string of numbers etched upon it. "Call me, for any reason at all, or if you simply wish to speak. I meant every word. I carry my grandmother's belief in my heart. I believe in shielding the magic that still lives here." Long after the ranger's truck had become a distant hum, Margaret remained on her porch, a silent sentinel. The sun painted its slow, golden arc across the heavens, pulling the shadows of the great trees long across the earth, and from the deep woods she could feel them, a subtle shift in the air. Her watchers, her guardians, ensuring the wake of the stranger had left her world undisturbed. That evening she opened her journal, but her pen wrote, not of the creatures, but of the woman named Martinez, of the startling revelation that the world of rules and uniforms already knew, of the fragile possibility that protection might be woven not just from silence, but from a careful and courageous trust. She was 64 years old. The seasons of her own life were turning toward winter. The question bloomed in her mind, vast and somber, what would become of them when the beat of her own heart was gone? Who would stand for them? Who would be their shield? They came that night, a palpable presence in the darkness. Not one, but a great many. They moved with a familiar reverence around her small cabin, a silent chorus making it known that they had come to commune. Margaret opened her door and stepped into the cool, moonlit night. The elder stood before her, his presence immense, and behind him, perhaps a dozen others were arrayed in the shadows. A council had been convened. "We must speak," she said, her voice steady in the vast quiet, "of the future, of the days that will dawn when I am no longer here to greet them." The elder inclined his great head, a gesture of profound and patient listening. Margaret retrieved the card Martinez had given her. She held it up in the pale light, a small, white flag of truce from another world. "There is someone, a guardian of this forest. She carries a desire to help, a wish to keep you safe, but her help requires a leap of faith. It requires a risk." She painted the story for them as best she could, her words a thread weaving through gestures and pictures she drew with a stick in the soft earth. She drew the ranger, the symbol of the Forest Service, the concept of a sanctuary enshrined by law. She sketched the peril of being seen against the greater peril of being discovered by a world that would not understand. They listened, their stillness a testament to the weight of her words. They conferred amongst themselves, a silent symphony of gestures and breath that was older than the trees. At long last, the elder turned his gaze back to her. He made a deliberate motion, pointing first to her, then to the card she held, and finally to his own heart. "The path is yours to choose. Our faith walks with you." Margaret felt the gravity of that trust settle upon her, a burden as heavy and as sacred as the mountain itself. "All right," she breathed. "All right. I will arrange a council. But it will be on your terms, within your sacred ground. And if you sense even a shadow of falsehood, you will vanish back into the forest. As you have always done." The elder placed a hand over the center of his chest. A pact was sealed. That night, Margaret's hand trembled as she dialed the number on the card. She set in motion something unprecedented, a conversation between a human world and a world of myth, to be mediated by a 64-year-old retired nurse who had wandered into a fairy tale by sheer, beautiful accident. The world was turning. The forest was breathing a new air. But perhaps that was not a thing to be feared. Perhaps change did not have to be a synonym for destruction. Perhaps, sometimes, it could be the harbinger of evolution. Margaret fell asleep that night with a fledgling hope nestled in her chest. It felt impossibly delicate, a strange and fragile warmth that might shatter if she held on too tightly. But it was there. And for this one night, its gentle pulse was enough. The meeting was to take place in 3 weeks' time. A space for the air to settle, for hearts to steady, a grace period for contemplation, and for retreat, should courage falter on either side. Margaret poured her nervous anticipation into those weeks of waiting. She cleaned her cabin with a feverish intensity, not because the ranger would see it, but because the simple, rhythmic work soothed the humming in her soul. She drafted lists of unspoken laws that must be honored, and she sketched maps of their hidden territories, charting the sacred places where their lives unfolded. It was as if she were preparing for the most consequential interview of her existence. Only the stakes were etched, not in the lines of a career, but in the very continuation of an entire species that lived only in whispers. The creatures, too, were in preparation, a truth she could feel in the marrow of her bones. Their visits grew sparse over those 3 weeks, as if they were holding their own solemn councils, debating the meaning of this fragile bridge being built. When they did appear, a palpable tension surrounded them, not of fear, but of a profound and ancient wariness. For millennia, they had worn the cloak of invisibility with flawless grace. Every instinct honed by ages of silence must have screamed for them to remain hidden. But the world was shrinking, its mysteries unraveled by the unblinking eyes of cameras, drones, and watchers in the sky. The old ways of being unseen were becoming a fading dream. Margaret understood this painful calculus of the soul. She had made similar wagers in the landscape of her own life. Sometimes, to gain true sanctuary, one must first risk standing in the light. Just 2 days before the summit, the elder came forth alone. He strode from the deep woods into the full light of day with the quiet grace of one who owned the very earth he walked upon, which, Margaret mused, in a way, he truly did. She met him in the sun-dappled stillness of the clearing. "Does your heart harbor any second thoughts?" she asked, her voice soft. The elder responded not with words, but with a deliberate gesture. It was not the shape of doubt, but the form of a question. He indicated her with a slow point of his hand, then swept his arm to embrace the whole of the forest. The unspoken query hung between them. Why? For what reason was she undertaking this monumental task? Margaret let the silence settle, seeking words worthy of the truth. "Because you saved me," she said at last. "On that first night, and in every dawn that has followed, you gave me a reason to continue when I was certain I had none left. This is simply me returning the gift." The elder studied her for a long, profound moment. He then wove another gesture, this one more complex. A touch to her heart, then to his own, followed by a sweeping arc toward the far-off horizon, a silent poem declaring that all things were connected. "Yes," Margaret breathed, her voice a whisper of assent. "We are connected, human, and, whatever you are, we are both children of this mountain. We share this world. It is our duty to protect one another." The elder placed a hand over his chest in that timeless gesture of gratitude and deep respect. He then drew from his pouch a small, exquisitely carved box, a treasure of intricate and breathtaking beauty. He opened it to reveal its contents. Within lay a lock of pure white fur, his own, she realized with a catch of her breath. Beside it rested a tiny, carved figure, an elder, him. It was more than a gift, more than a token. It was a symbol of his trust, a mantle of authority. It was the physical proof that Margaret spoke with the elder's sacred blessing. She accepted the box with trembling hands. "I will guard this with my life," she vowed. "I promise." The elder gave a slow, solemn nod. Then he did something that bridged the chasm between their worlds. He reached out and took her hand, his, immense and powerful, hers, small and gnarled with age, and held it for a heartbeat, a gentle squeeze that needed no translation. In that touch, she felt the words, "Thank you, be careful, return to us safely." Then he released her and melted back into the forest, leaving Margaret standing in the clearing, holding a box that contained the proof of impossible, beautiful things. The day of the meeting dawned under clear skies, with a gentle temperament in the air. Perfect weather for a pilgrimage. Margaret had given Martinez coordinates to a meadow nearly 2 miles from her cabin, far enough to grant the creatures a sense of freedom, yet close enough for her own protesting knees to make the journey. She set out from her cabin at first light, carrying a pack with water, healing supplies, and the elder's sacred carved box. The forest was hushed around her, steeped in that anticipatory silence that falls just before the world is about to change forever. When she arrived at the meadow, Martinez was already there. She had honored the request and come alone, her uniform replaced by simple jeans and a flannel shirt, a quiet offering of peace, an attempt to appear as a guest, not an invader. "Are they here?" Martinez asked, her voice a mere whisper on the breeze. "They're watching," Margaret answered softly. "We must give them a moment." And so they waited. Martinez stood perfectly still, her hands in plain sight, her posture a study in tranquility. Margaret had coached her in this silent diplomacy, no sudden movements, no direct stares, only the presentation of a calm and unthreatening spirit. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity, then 10. Then, from the deep green line of the trees, there was a stirring. The elder emerged first, a solitary figure stepping into the light. He came alone, testing the air, testing their hearts. A soft sound escaped Martinez, part gasp, part prayer, a collision of fear and utter awe. But to her profound credit, she remained rooted to the earth. She did not run. She did not reach for a phone or a camera. "Sweet heavens," she breathed, the words trembling. "By all that is holy, it's real." "Do not hold his gaze," Margaret murmured, her voice a steady anchor. "And breathe. You're holding your breath." A trembling breath escaped Martinez's lips as the elder drifted closer, halting some 20 feet away, his deep, knowing eyes plumbing the depths of her spirit. Margaret stepped into the space between them, lifting the carved box as a testament. "I stand for her," she murmured, her voice a thread of trust. "Her purpose is to help, to shelter your people from harm." The elder's gaze fell upon the box, a flicker of ancient recognition in his eyes, before returning to rest upon Martinez. Guided by an instinct deeper than reason, Martinez sank to her knees, a gesture of humility that softened her presence. "I am Sarah Martinez," she offered, her voice a quiet current. "I serve this forest. Since I was a child, legends of your people have been woven into my soul. I have never wished you harm. I only wish—" She hesitated, her heart searching for the words. "To see you safe, to know you can dwell here, forever free from fear." The elder inclined his great head, his entire being a vessel for her words, listening with a stillness that felt ancient and absolute. Then, from the depths of his being, a sound arose, a low, resonant query that hung in the air like the morning mist. Margaret, bridging the chasm between worlds, gave voice to his query. "He wishes to understand the shape of this protection, the substance of your offering." "A promise of seclusion for these sacred grounds," Martinez replied, her gaze fixed on the elder. "We can consecrate these lands as sanctuaries, where the foot of man may not tread. It is a vow we make for the most vulnerable of species, and we can make it now for your people. An existence untouched by the hunter, the lens, or the blade of progress." Another sound bloomed from the elder, a far more intricate melody of inquiry and concern. "He asks of the balance," Margaret interpreted softly. "What price must be paid for this peace? What do you seek in return?" "Nothing," Martinez answered, her voice ringing with sincerity, "only a thread of connection. If a shadow falls upon this land from hunters, or loggers drawing too near, or lost hikers who threaten the balance, let a whisper reach us. Allow us to become the guardians you need." The elder stood in profound silence, weighing her words in the ancient scales of his wisdom. Then, with a slow, deliberate gesture toward the tree line, he summoned them. From the emerald depths, more figures materialized like spirits of the wood the matriarch Margaret had once saved, her presence a living testament, and others beside her. Not their entire hidden nation, but a solemn council of its heart. They arranged themselves in a silent, watching crescent at the meadow's edge, their collective gaze, a powerful current, evaluating the spirit of the human before them. Martinez remained a humble supplicant upon the earth. "I know," she began, her voice carrying the weight of history, "that my kind has given you no reason for trust. We have scarred the earth and silenced the voices of countless creatures. But I also know there are hearts that ache for what's been lost. Hearts like Margaret's." She gestured to her friend. "She has been the bridge between our worlds. Now, let me be your bridge to the protectors of this forest. Let me help." A silent council commenced among the forest folk, their language, a symphony of sound and gesture flowing between them, a river of thought Margaret could only partially fathom. She perceived the currents of dissent and the shadows of caution, yet she also sensed a fragile glimmer of something new, perhaps hope, or the stark realization that the veil of secrecy could not hold forever. "At last," the council concluded. The elder stepped forth from the crescent, his movements imbued with ancient grace. He gestured first to Martinez, then to Margaret, and finally, in a motion that transcended all language, he laid a hand upon his heart. It was an accord, tentative and bound by unspoken conditions, but it was an agreement nonetheless. As if rising from a prayer, Martinez slowly came to her feet. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with the gravity of the moment. "I swear I will not fail this sacred trust." The elder replied with a gesture more intricate than before. Margaret translated, her voice low. "He speaks of covenants. The memory of this meeting must remain a secret held by you alone. You may weave your shield of protection, but the reason for it must remain veiled. And if they ever feel the shadow of a threat from weapons, or cameras, or the desire to capture, they will vanish into legend. Forever." Martinez met his gaze, her own resolve a mirror to his. "I understand," she affirmed. "These terms are accepted and will be honored." For another hour, the delicate treaty was forged, weaving together the threads of their alliance, methods of communication, protocols for peril, and the sacred lines of unseen boundaries. Margaret served as the voice between them, yet she felt a new language being born, a silent dialect of mutual respect, spoken only by Martinez and the elder, a shared vow to protect something precious. When their council concluded, The forest folk dissolved back into the trees, becoming one with the shadows. Martinez remained standing in the meadow, her face illuminated as if she had just witnessed a miracle which, Margaret knew in her soul, she had. "The world will never believe what has happened here," Martinez breathed, the words a reverent whisper on the quiet air. "No," Margaret agreed softly. "They are not ready for this truth, which is why the story must remain ours alone." "I know. And yet, my grandmother." Martinez's voice trembled with revelation. She was right all along. She turned to Margaret, her eyes shining. "Do you realize what this means? You are not just a retired nurse in the woods. You are the heart of a living legend. You are the proof." A gentle smile touched Margaret's lips. "I am only a woman who chose to mend a creature in pain," she said. "Everything else simply bloomed from that one small seed of compassion." In a shared, contemplative silence, they walked back toward the edge of the human world, where the path would soon divide one way, leading to Martinez's truck, the other to Margaret's solitary cabin. "Will you find your way back safely through the twilight?" Martinez asked, her voice laced with a newfound protective care. "For 7 years, these trails have been my companions," Margaret answered with a serene smile. "The forest knows my way home." But before their paths diverged, Martinez produced a satellite phone, a modern ember in the ancient wood. "Take this," she insisted. "It is a direct thread to me, one that will never break. If you need me, or if they need me, this call will be answered, be it in the brightest day or the darkest night." Margaret accepted the device, a modern talisman, and nested it within her pack beside the chronicle of her days, the salves for her wounds, and all the tangible burdens of this miraculous, unfolding existence. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a soft current in the forest's hush, "for lending your faith to this impossible truth, for the simple, profound desire to help." "And thank you," Martinez replied, her own voice thick with the weight of the moment, "for placing your trust in my hands. This is the defining purpose of my life's work. I feel it in my very soul." A handshake sealed their sacred pact, a silent vow exchanged between two worlds. Then, as Martinez descended the path toward the steel and glass of her own reality, Margaret turned her face toward the sanctuary she now called home. A profound stillness settled upon the woods, a silence that was not an absence, but a presence. The forest held its breath, full and watchful. Never again would it feel empty to her. She offered her thoughts to the ancient sentinels of the forest, her voice a murmur against the bark. I believe that unfolded as it was meant to. And from the deep, verdant heart of the shadows, a sound arose, a low, resonant hum that vibrated with an unmistakable air of approval. They had been her silent witnesses. Of course, their gaze had been upon her through the entire exchange, a constant, unseen guardianship. A smile, born of peace and belonging, graced Margaret's lips as she continued her journey homeward through their shared domain. In the months that followed, a quiet shield began to unfurl across the land, woven slowly through the labyrinthine corridors of bureaucracy. Vast swaths of the wild backcountry were reborn on paper as sacred sanctuaries, unseen lines were drawn, access was gently curtailed, and the Forest Service became a more vigilant presence. The official narrative spoke of fragile salamanders and flora of exquisite rarity, but the unspoken truth was the creation of a consecrated buffer around a civilization of beings who lived and breathed only in the realm of myth. And the gentle deception held. Wayward hikers, their stories filled with strange encounters, were softly guided toward other paths. Hunters who pressed too deeply into the sacred woods were met with warnings. The land, at last, could exhale. From the quiet haven of her cabin, Margaret observed this silent miracle unfold, her days punctuated by Martinez's visits, some cloaked in official duty, but the most precious being those when they would sit upon the porch, warmed by coffee, and speak of the impossible truths that had become their reality. Whispers are beginning to circulate about extending the sanctuary. Martinez confided one sun-drenched August afternoon, elevating it to a federal level, consecrating this entire mountain range as a national preserve. That would be a blessing, Margaret mused, her eyes on the distant peaks. A stronger shield, a wider, more peaceful shore. It would also invite a brighter, more inquisitive light, Martinez added with a wry smile. More questions about our very dedicated protection of salamanders, but we will navigate those waters. Bureaucracy is a master at burying truth in mountains of paper. The ancient folk of the forest seemed to sense the shift in the world's currents. A new freedom graced their movements. Margaret's world was enriched by the sight of families with their young ones learning the territory and elders passing on quiet pilgrimages, their gazes assessing the new peace. In their world, she had become a landmark of the heart, a point of sanctuary on their ancestral maps, the human who had woven her spirit into theirs. But as the forest healed, her own mortal vessel began its slow decline. The ache in her knee was a deeper pain, and her heart, that faithful drum, now played an erratic rhythm, a gentle reminder that she had seen 65 winters, and that all mortal forms are but fleeting vessels. Her thoughts turned more often to the great mystery, not with dread, but with a quiet, curious acceptance. For most of her life, she had been a disciple of the tangible. But after the last year and a half, after all she had witnessed, the foundations of her certainty had crumbled into wonder. If beings of myth could leave their footprints upon the forest floor, then perhaps the soul, too, did not simply extinguish, but journeyed onward, transforming into some new and wondrous form. She held that hope like a fragile ember, hoping that Thomas existed in that somewhere, his spirit able to witness what she had forged from the ashes of her grief, a legacy of peace built in the aftermath of his departure. Then, on a September night when the air held the first crisp promise of autumn, the elder appeared. He came alone, his very bearing imbued with a profound solemnity, a silent language of ceremony and great importance. Margaret met him on the threshold of her home, her question a soft breath on the night air. "What is it you need of me?" Without a word, the elder beckoned her forward with a slow, deliberate gesture, then turned and melted back into the ancient embrace of the forest. For the space of a single heartbeat, Margaret paused. Then, with a resolve that defied her body's weariness, she took up her cane and followed him into the deep. Their pilgrimage lasted for more than an hour, leading them deeper into the mountain's heart than she had ever dared to venture. Her knee cried out and her lungs burned, yet she pressed on, sustained by an unshakable faith that their destination held a profound purpose. And then, at the journey's end, they emerged into a place that stole the very breath from her lungs. It was a valley, cradled between towering peaks, its entrance a secret guarded by a slender pass. And there, nestled in its embrace, were not mere shelters, but a testament to civilization, grand structures of stone and wood, each a symphony of purpose and artistry, echoing with the wisdom of generations. A village. They had built a village, a living, breathing home hidden from the eyes of the world. The elder guided her into the very heart of their world, a place where creatures emerged from the shadowed doorways of their homes, not in dozens, but perhaps 100 strong. This was the embrace she had unknowingly sought, an acceptance so final, so complete, it settled into her bones as they entrusted her with a sight no mortal had ever witnessed, the sacred, fragile heart of their existence. With a graceful sweep of his hand, the elder summoned them forward, and others came bearing chairs of intricately carved wood, fashioned for the frame of a human, crafted, it seemed, for this very occasion. The words that flowed were not of her world, not of any tongue she knew, yet as she listened to the rise and fall, the ancient cadence of their speech, she understood the soul of the message. "This is the sanctuary we call home," her heart translated. "This is the life we cherish and protect, and this precious world is what your courage helped us save." A universe of gratitude was conveyed in that single, unspoken thought. For hours, the ceremony unfolded like a timeless tapestry, filled with strange and wonderful flavors, and a low, rhythmic music that seemed to rise from the very earth, as if the forest itself had found its voice. And then came the stories, woven into the air by many voices. Though the language was a river she could not chart, she felt the currents of their long seclusion, their losses, their quiet triumphs, and a fragile hope that a new dawn was finally possible. As the gathering drew to a gentle close, the elder escorted her to the threshold of her world, bestowing one last gift, a staff of profound beauty and strength, a companion crafted to endure a lifetime. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. "I am not worthy of such kindness," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The elder simply placed a hand over his own heart, then reached out to gently touch hers, a silent communion that spoke volumes. "We are one. All things are connected." "Yes," Margaret murmured through her tears, no longer trying to hide them. "We are all connected." She found her way back to her cabin as the first blush of dawn painted the sky, sinking into her chair by the hearth, a vessel of beautiful exhaustion and soaring elation. She had been permitted to gaze upon something utterly precious, something truly sacred, and the weight of their trust was a staggering, humbling honor. Margaret filled her journal with new ink, but beyond the poetry, she penned a passage of pure pragmatism, for she was 65 years old and understood that life requires a plan for its ending. Her pen formed the words with solemn purpose. "When my time is done, this journal must be given to Ranger Sarah Martinez. She will understand its importance. She will keep them safe, Trust her. With careful hands, she swaddled the journal in protective oilcloth, secured it within its metal coffer, and consigned it once more to the secret darkness beneath the floorboards. A quiet provision for the future. A final, silent prayer against the unknown. The world turned, and winter returned to blanket the forest in white, her third winter of belonging to a family woven from the woods itself. Her steps had grown more measured, and on some days she never ventured beyond her door, content by the fire's embrace, as her forest friends visited with a tender reverence, knowing her flame burned a little less brightly. Deep in the heart of January, a shadow fell as her own heart began a frantic dance, followed by a crushing weight upon her chest. The textbook signs she had witnessed 1,000 times in the emergency room. A betrayal of the heart, a small one, perhaps, but undeniably real. She remained in her chair, drawing each breath with deliberate care, knowing the satellite phone from Martinez was within reach, a single call, and the sky would thunder with the sound of rescue. But did she truly desire the cold sterility of hospitals and the intrusion of machines? Or did her soul yearn to remain here, in this haven she adored, among the gentle beings who had become her truest kin? Before her mind could settle on an answer, a sound of urgent movement arose outside, and her door, which had never known a lock, swung open to reveal the elder standing on the threshold. His ancient eyes took in her state in a single, knowing glance, and a low thrumming escaped his throat, the pure, unvarnished sound of alarm. "I'm all right," she breathed, the words a faint whisper. Just a moment is all I need." But he would not be placated, lifting her with a gentleness that belied his immense strength and carrying her into the crisp night air, where the matriarch she had once saved now waited, her arms laden with medicines of the forest. There in the moonlit clearing, they ministered to her, and as she drank a warm, earthy tea, the vice around her heart began to loosen, the crushing weight lifted by a medicine more potent than any she had ever known. There Margaret lay, a fragile form against the vast canvas of snow, encircled by the very beings she had once shielded, their gentle ministrations a sacred echo of the kindness she had first offered them. A breath of gratitude escaped her lips, a whispered prayer to the winter air. "Thank you, oh thank you." Through the profound stillness of the night, the elder remained, a steadfast guardian, a silent sentinel keeping vigil over the faint, precious rhythm of her breath. When the first light of dawn spilled across the snow, a fragile strength had returned to her. With infinite tenderness, they guided her to the hearth's warm embrace, and for the 7 days that followed, they were her devoted caretakers, bringing sustenance, tending the flames, their presence a constant, reassuring whisper. The roles had beautifully reversed. She was now the one in their care, and they attended to her with a devotion as pure and unwavering as the mountain stars. Though her strength returned, she recognized this as a gentle summons, a quiet reminder that her body was growing weary. Medicine could not halt the inevitable tide, and she met this truth with grace, knowing no soul escapes this mortal coil, and that her journey had been a magnificent one. It was more than magnificent, truly. She had been gifted 7 years woven from pure wonder, 7 years of finding her place in a world she never knew existed, 7 years of profound purpose that bloomed long after she believed her season had passed. It was a treasure of time, a richness of being, that few are ever fortunate enough to know. And so, with a clear and gentle heart, she began to set her affairs in order, filling the final pages of her journal and penning a long letter to Martinez, a testament not merely of the creatures, but of the sacred bond and profound responsibility this knowledge carried. She committed this legacy to the earth, the letter and journal sealed against the elements, a time capsule of wonder tucked safely into the soil. With her final duty fulfilled, she granted herself the gift of peace, allowing her spirit to simply rest, to simply be, in the quiet rhythm of the days. That year, spring arrived with a tender hesitation. From her porch, swathed in blankets, and the elder's staff beside her, Margaret watched the world's gentle awakening as the snow wept into the earth and life's vibrant green reclaimed the land. She had reached her 66th year, a milestone that had eluded her own mother, a season of life that some of her fellow nurses, their candles extinguished too soon, had never seen. She felt, old enough. Her forest family came to her each day, their visits a gentle pilgrimage, the elder, the matriarch, or the little ones, with offerings of wildflowers and stones. They understood, she knew in her heart, they could feel the gentle dimming of her light. Then, on a soft morning in May, she awoke to a breathtaking sight. Every soul of their community had gathered, hundreds standing in a silent, solemn circle that embraced her small cabin like a living wreath of devotion. Leaning on the gifted staff, she made her way onto the porch, her voice a soft query in the reverent air. "My friends, what is this?" though a deep and quiet knowing had already answered in her heart. The elder moved from the circle, his hands weaving a gesture of profound complexity, a beautiful, silent language that spoke more clearly than words of presence, of companionship, of a bond that would not let her face the twilight alone. Warm tears traced paths down her weathered cheeks. "I know," she breathed, her gaze sweeping over them all. "I have not known a moment of loneliness since that very first night." And so they remained through the long arc of the day, a silent, steadfast vigil, a living, breathing monument to a love that knew no bounds of fur or skin. As the setting sun bathed the world in hues of gold and amber, the elder approached her porch once more, holding a wooden box whose carvings were even more exquisite, more deeply storied than the first he had gifted her. He lifted the lid, revealing a lock of her own silver-gray hair, gathered from her pillow as she slept, resting beside a small figure carved from heartwood. It was her, rendered with such loving detail she could see the map of her life etched in her face and the faithful staff in her hand. It was a gift in return, a promise whispered in wood and hair. She was being woven into their history, immortalized in their stories, and enshrined within their collective memory. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat, "for rescuing me when I was lost, for welcoming me into a world so much larger than my own, for—" Her voice fractured, "for giving my final years a meaning I never dreamed possible." The elder placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of profound sincerity, and then gently touched his hand to hers. A current passed between them, a silent affirmation. Connected. All is connected. From the circle, a sound began to swell, a low, resonant hum that grew into a harmony of voices, rising like incense into the twilight air. It was a song, and they were singing it for her. And Margaret, in her chair on the porch, simply closed her eyes and listened as the ancient soul of the forest itself sang her toward a gentle sleep. She was granted the gift of another summer and then a vibrant autumn, and she held on through the deepest heart of the winter that followed. Martinez came whenever the roads allowed, her arms full of supplies, her eyes full of wonder at the tender, tireless care the creatures gave. The protections were a fortress, the federal designation was official, and this sacred mountain, for now, was safe. "This was your doing, Margaret," Martinez would say, her voice full of awe. "You built a bridge between worlds. You changed the very fabric of things. I only offered a hand to a soul in need," Margaret would reply with a soft smile. The rest simply bloomed from that one small seed. Such are the words that always fall from the lips of a hero. A soft laugh escaped Margaret's lips. "I am no hero. I am simply a nurse, one whose heart could never ignore the cry of another in pain. That is the only truth I have ever been." And yet, in the quiet chambers of her heart, she knew she was so much more. A truth her humility would never allow her to voice. When February returned, it brought a cruel and deep-seated cold. Margaret's fragile body answered its call with a whisper of defeat, another tremor in her heart, this one more vicious than the last. The medicine was but a faint shield against the inevitable. A quiet certainty settled over her spirit. This was the final chapter. This was the end of her story. Her voice, carried across the ether by the satellite phone, reached Martinez. "I need you to come," she pleaded softly. "There is a legacy I must place into your hands." Martinez arrived the following day, a lone pilgrim trekking through a world of white, only to find Margaret resting in her chair by the fire, wrapped in the warmth of blankets, the staff lying across her lap like a sleeping friend. "Beneath the floorboards in my bedroom," Margaret murmured, her voice a gentle rustle, "lies a metal box. Inside, you will find my journal. Every wonder I have witnessed, every lesson I have learned, it is yours now." Margaret, "My time is ending, Sarah. Please, do not argue. I am a nurse. I know the signs." A faint, knowing smile graced Margaret's lips. "And it is all right. I am ready. But the creatures, they will need a guardian when I am gone. A soul who understands. A heart that will shield them." "I will," Martinez vowed, tears finally tracing paths of sorrow down her cheeks. "I give you my sacred promise." "Good." Margaret's eyelids fluttered closed. "You will also find instructions, the keys to their language, the wisdom for times of crisis. All of it is there. You will find your way." And so they sat together, suspended in a shared silence, as the fire whispered its crackling song, and the great forest beyond held its breath in quiet reverence. "Will they be safe?" Martinez asked, her question a fragile prayer. "After you have departed?" "They have endured for thousands of years," Margaret answered, her voice a gentle reassurance. "They will endure still. They are born of survival." She paused, a shadow of sorrow crossing her features. "But they will feel my absence, and I, theirs. Where do you imagine your spirit will journey? In the after?" Margaret contemplated the vast mystery. I cannot say for certain. Somewhere, I hope, perhaps I will find Thomas again, and I can finally share these wonders with him. He would have adored it all. He would have feigned indifference, but in his heart, he would have been utterly captivated. I believe you will, Martinez affirmed softly. See him. I believe. I believe that consciousness must journey onward, that such energy can never truly be extinguished. May your words travel from your lips to the ears of the divine. Their conversation drifted with the hours until dusk began to fall as Martinez tended to the fire and made soup, performing the quiet, tender rituals of care one offers to a soul preparing for its final journey. As the last sliver of sun bled below the horizon, a sound arose from the twilight, a stirring in the woods. The creatures were gathering. Martinez's gaze met Margaret's, a silent question in her eyes. Should I leave you to them? No, Margaret insisted gently. Stay. Be a witness to this moment. It is their wish that you see. Once more, the creatures formed their solemn circle, a silent congregation under the emerging stars. The elder appeared at the threshold, his ancient eyes peering within. His gaze found Martinez, not with reproach, but with a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound acceptance. He crossed the room to Margaret's chair and knelt beside her, gently taking her frail hand within his own immense one. It's all right, she whispered, her voice serene. I feel no fear. I was blessed with a beautiful life. And now, a beautiful ending. That is a grace few are ever granted. From the elder's throat came a series of low, gentle tones, a sound that resonated with the cadence of an ancient, unspoken language. I know, Margaret breathed, though the meaning was not of the mind, but of the heart. She could feel the intent woven into the sounds, gratitude, and a profound love that knew no bounds of species. I know, and I love you too, every one of you. Her eyes drifted shut for the final time as the sound swelled, joined now by the entire community, their voices rising in a chorus. It was a song both beautiful and haunting, a melody that resonated deep within the soul and made you believe in a universe far greater than yourself. Martinez sank to the floor, a quiet vigil beside Margaret's chair, her own hand a warm sanctuary for the one left waiting, and in a voice no louder than a sigh, she breathed the question, should I summon someone to our side? No. Margaret's voice was a gentle whisper. This is the departure I have chosen. Here, among them, beside you, this moment. It is perfection. Each breath became a softer tide, receding from the shore of life, as the pain that held her captive released its grip, and she was embraced by a weightlessness, as if carried on a current of unseen air. And then, from across a veil she could not see, a sound bloomed in the distance. It was his voice, Thomas, calling her name through the echoes of time. I am coming home. She breathed into the world. She was leaving. I am on my way. The final symphony to grace Margaret Hayes' ears was the ancient chorus of the forest, and the last sensation to fill her soul was the unbreakable weave of connection, the pure essence of love, the profound peace of belonging. And then, her light dissolved back into the starlight from which it came. 3 days hence, they returned her to the earth, not to a cold and manicured cemetery, for Margaret had willed against such a fate, wishing to remain on the mountain to become one with the very soil that had nourished her spirit. In the heart of Margaret's clearing, Martinez and a solemn few from the Forest Service carved a resting place from the ground, while from the shadowed boughs the creatures stood vigil, a silent guard of honor. When the task was complete, and her form was gently lowered into the embrace of the earth, the elder stepped forward, placing upon the fresh soil a sacred offering, the intricately carved box that held her likeness, a tribute crafted to be woven into the tapestry of their own history. It was more than a marker. It was a memorial etched, not in stone, but in the heartwood of their existence. Martinez then offered her own tribute, the journal, sealed within a vessel to defy the elements, laid to rest with Margaret so that her story, her very soul, would remain with her, a protected and sacred secret. As the earth reclaimed its own, the creatures lifted their voices in song, the same haunting melody from the night of her passing, a harmony both beautiful and terrible, woven from the threads of an ancient sorrow. Tears streamed down Martinez's face as she stood, a lone witness, listening to a requiem sung by impossible beings for the woman who had dared to build a bridge between their worlds. When the final note faded into silence, the creatures melted back into the deep woods like shadows at dawn. Yet Martinez knew in her heart this was not a farewell. They would return to this hallowed ground. they would always remember. Each month became a pilgrimage for her. She would tend the grave, leave blossoms as offerings, and ensure the Forest Service's promised protections remained unbroken, and though the creatures never revealed themselves, she would feel their presence, a rustle in the leaves, a whisper on the wind. They were watching. Then, on a spring morning that marked 5 years since Margaret's passing, Martinez arrived to find a new offering upon the grave. A small bouquet of wildflowers, their petals still jeweled with dew, and beside them a carving humble and profound of a woman and a creature, their hands intertwined for eternity. They had been visiting all along, their memory of her had not faded with the seasons. Martinez knelt beside the sacred earth, her fingers tracing the lines of the carved figures. "You are still connecting our worlds, aren't you?" she whispered to the quiet air. Even now, a profound silence settled over the forest around her, but it was not the silence of absence. It was never empty. For deep within the cathedral of trees, a life stirred, a presence that was watching and remembering. Margaret Hayes had walked this earth for 66 years. For 37 of those, she was a healer of human bodies, and for 7, she became an architect of the impossible, building a bridge between species. And now, even from beyond the veil, her spirit continued to teach the lesson that had defined her existence: to offer a hand when a hand is needed, to weave connections across the chasms that divide us, and to choose the path of kindness, especially when the way is fraught with difficulty. This was the true measure of her legacy, not in a tally of lives saved or accolades earned, but in the luminous threads of connection she wove, the bedrock of trust she laid, and the undeniable proof that compassion knows no boundary. The ancient creatures of the forest held this truth in their hearts. The guardians of the Forest Service understood this truth in their souls, and every person who had ever felt the quiet strength of her care knew this truth in their bones. In the grand tapestry of the world, she was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman, one who went to her work, lived her days, and sought to find a glimmer of meaning in the shadow of a great loss. Yet, it is a timeless truth that ordinary souls are capable of the most extraordinary acts when they allow their hearts to be their compass. And this is what Margaret Hayes had illuminated for the world. Not that impossible creatures walked the earth, but that a sacred connection was possible, that a bridge of understanding could be built, and that we are all human and other, more alike than different, if only we can find the courage to reach out. A gentle wind whispered through the clearing where Margaret lay in her final slumber as the sun poured through the canopy, bathing the hallowed ground in hues of liquid gold, and somewhere deep within the forest's protected heart, life carried on. A life that owed its continuation to her compassion. A life that would carry the memory of her name in its stories for generations yet to be born. And in that singular moment, she discovered what was enough, and in its sufficiency, she found everything. A profound tranquility had at last settled upon the soul of Margaret Hayes, and the ancient woods, in their silent wisdom, cradled her newfound peace in their eternal embrace.